Our story takes place in a mass-produced fantasy novel where Carnelia Easter, the daughter of a baron, was able to become a prince's wife as the Villainess. The palace had two princes. The first, Caesar, the protagonist of the story and the son of a handmaiden, and the second prince, the son of the empress. Empress Evgenia desired her son to be emperor, and Carnelia was chosen to prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, Carnelia formed an alliance with the empress and made plans to divorce the first prince if he ever lost his position, and during their time engaged, she ridiculed her husband's mother. The queen, for her lowly birth, spent the prince's fortune and committed wickedness in his name, and this led to him calling for her execution. A predictable end for a predictable villainess. Big problem for a fan of this series, though, is that she was reincarnated as Carnelia, sucked into the novel she was reading. She was now the Villainess, destined to die by the young boy protagonist in the future, and stuck in a bridal chamber with him. He was as cold as ever. Of course, not hiding his displeasure towards the Empress's pawn, but still nice enough to let her do whatever she felt like. So, she decided to rest, carefree, in the big, fluffy bed. But noticing he was being awkward, she asked if he wanted her to sing him a lullaby, causing him to get annoyed, pull the covers over to lay beside her, while saying he hated her. A little hurt by his comment, she was sympathetic, understanding he'd be wary of her, given how much he suffered because of the Empress. In the story, the Empress harassed the prince and his mother mercilessly, insulting them in public and reducing his budget in half, even having the maids dispose of all presents delivered to him. Although he lived through a difficult childhood, he'd solidify his position as crown prince by coming home from war as a hero and receiving adoration from the emperor. He'd later punish the Empress and Carnelia, then marry the heroine of the story, Duke Lancaster's daughter. Thinking of the story, the reincarnated girl pitied her position as Carnelia even more. Her plan now was to treat Caesar nicely, so that he hopefully wouldn't kill her and divorce peacefully instead. The day she died from the traffic accident was still fresh in her mind. Waking up, she wondered why her head hurt so much, and touching her head, Caesar could tell she had a fever. Her cheeks were burning. The wedding required so much physical labor. It was probably too much for her child body to bear. She decided to rest it off. It was hard adjusting to this world. How could anyone adjust to dying from an accident and waking up to this? A year later, while she was getting accustomed to her new reality, a marriage proposal arrived from the palace. In accordance to the story, Carnelia accepted that she had to find a path to survive while following the events. Her new parents sold off their 12-year-old daughter to the palace with no hesitation. The palace's ladies-in-waiting were also rude to her. In this world, she had no friends and no family. She woke up again to Caesar shouting at her. He spoon-fed her medicine so that her fever could go down. She thought it might be better if she were dead, but had no choice but to accept. She eventually woke up again with Caesar by her side and lamented over the fact that she was still in the world of the novel. He asked her what was wrong, but she refused to answer, of course, thinking there's no way he'd believe her. However, she still wanted to know why he saved her. He answered, thinking he knew she missed her home, and that if she wanted to see her parents, she could just invite them over, but told her this room was his, and he didn't want to get rid of a corpse from this space, especially not a corpse of a 12-year-old girl. Leaving the room, he told her to return to her chambers as soon as the sun was up. Carnelia was now at a loss on what to do. She wondered if he thought she was ungrateful for him saving her because she wanted to die. A knock at the door, and the palace ladies-in-waiting suddenly entered, begging her for forgiveness for misjudging the gravity of her illness. She scoffed because they were lying. The majority of the servants in the palace were Empress Evgenia's people, and thus only truly cared for her son's side, and not anyone else on Caesar's. Still, improper care for a princess was considered a grave offense, so Carnelia punished one of them with a slap. They seemed a bit taken aback, obviously thinking she'd forgive them easily if they gently groveled before her. She reminded them she was the wife of the crown prince, personally selected by the empress, and threatened them with Evgenia deciding their punishment. After getting all dressed and better, having her morning tea, Carnelia told her maid Anne to help her get ready to go out. She was going to head to the empress's place. The two have a back and forth, and Evgenia didn't punish the ladies-in-waiting adequately, just like Carnelia expected, because they were all her spies she planted. Carnelia decided to wager the fact that she could provide better information than the ladies-in-waiting reported on the prince. Carnelia knew more, because she read the story, of course. She revealed that the prince often skipped lessons, something Evgenia already knew about. But what her intel didn't know was where he went. It was outside the palace. Since all of Caesar's tutors were people Evgenia employed, annoyed they wouldn't teach him properly. So, he'd often escape from them and train with the mercenaries who would later become his Order of Knights. This led to him secretly becoming a master of the sword. The way the story went, the Empress made Caesar go to war, which gave him the opportunity to distinguish himself. She didn't tell Evgenia all of this, instead only the part about him getting sword lessons from mercenaries. She used the excuse that she was able to easily coax a 12-year-old boy going through puberty, and that if she ever became useless, Evgenia could toss her aside. The only thing she wanted in return was to live lavishly. She didn't want to be a figurehead princess, nor be looked down by mere servants. And so, the Empress bought this and accepted Carnelia's offer. Carnelia decided to visit Caesar during his sword lessons. With him asking what she was doing here, she responded, supporting my husband? She was teasing, of course. She had him sit beside her, serving him treats while she explained herself. Thinking he hated her since she was a wife arranged by the Empress, she asked why he saved her again. He then repeated his answer of not wanting to dispose of a corpse once more. Carnelia noticed as an unsurpassable protagonist, he definitely still had a kind personality. He probably felt he had to do something about a sick girl lying before him. Hearing him look away while saying he didn't hate her, she smiled. He truly was kind to a fault. She decided to tell him the Empress caught on to the fact he'd been learning proper sword lessons outside the palace grounds, and that with spies now outside the palace, he'd have to hide his skills as much as he could when people were watching, but also told him to keep practicing because it'd come in handy one day. To this, he responded he didn't know what she was thinking, so she answered that she was his wife and that she'd always be by his side. Caesar felt truly conflicted by this. His mercenary sword instructor and closest confidant, Miller, told him she was probably just pretending to be on his side. Many spoke about how Evgenia arranged for his marriage with Carnelia to prevent Duke Lancaster from sending a marriage proposal for his daughter, since she wouldn't be able to ignore his political influence if his marriage joined him with one of the Empire's most powerful households. In contrast, Baron Easter had many debts, which were probably written off in return for selling his daughter to the royal family. Caesar felt compassion towards Carnelia because of this, but couldn't let his guard down since to some extent, he knew she was one of Evgenia's people. However, he still pondered on if she was truly a pawn of the Empress, concealing a dark heart, or just an ignorant victim sold off to the palace. And now that a spy was trailing them just like Carnelia had mentioned, he felt like he could trust her just a bit more. Evgenia introduced Carnelia to her actual son, Prince Noah, a couple weeks ago. He was so cute, Carnelia couldn't help but dote over him. He didn't want to read picture books or play dolls with her, but since she offered to show him where his big brother was, he was excited to see him. She only gushed over his cuteness even more. The two found Caesar hiding on top of a tree branch. Noah marveled over his brother's talent, but little did he know, Caesar would soon become an invincible protagonist who could beat up ogres like it was nothing. He jumped down, looking super cool, and the two brothers showed their affection. Despite how much Evgenia hated Caesar, the two half-brothers had a pretty good relationship. Noah and Carnelia wanted to play with Caesar's dog, Harvey, a cute, white, shaggy dog. They were stopped by one of the servants who alerted them it was that time of the month. This palace had a strange custom where married royals must share a bed once a month. The two lied in bed together, where Caesar slept quickly, and so passed another uneventful night for this couple. The two eventually went on a getaway outside of the palace. Carnelia got distracted seeing tornado potatoes, questioning how these could exist in a fantasy world. Returning back towards Caesar, he wasn't there. He got distracted when a noble who knew his face passed by and let go of her hand, then found by Miller, who was taking him to meet with the rest of the mercenaries. But instead of following, he went back to look for her and found her after looking all over. He was really panting and out of breath. He was seriously worried, asking if it ever crossed her mind that he might not have looked for her and just left. But she told him he wouldn't do that. She trusted him, taking her hand and leading her back. What she didn't know is that she was crossing one of many rivers between her and Caesar's heart. The mercenaries watched from afar, noticing she was the important matter Caesar had said needed his attention. 5 years of life in the palace went by in a flash, and Carnelia fully adjusted to her role as princess. Noah had lost to her in a horse race again. Now was the 92nd time out of 107. The two spoke of a difficult war on the southern front due to barbarians, where 17-year-old Caesar would be sent to battle. Noah was concerned, but Carnelia told him to trust in his brother. She knew the result would be his victory. After that day the royal couple snuck out together, she and Caesar grew quite close. But rather than becoming close as a married couple, he felt more like a male friend who had been living in the same neighborhood for 10 years. But now she was a bit annoyed that he hadn't told her he was going to war. She brought it up, and he wondered how she knew, but told her he wasn't trying to hide it. He just didn't want her to worry. She responded she wasn't worried, and he responded, "Good." She told him he was going to win and come back home safely. So in the meantime, she considered making him a purple cloak to wear at the triumphal celebration after he comes back a hero. He laughed hearing this, because though he was grateful, he didn't expect much from her skills as a seamstress. She still sympathized with him though, being a 17-year-old boy being sent to war. So she decided to hold him close and assure him everything would be alright. Noticing his stiff shoulders, she offered to massage him, but he pulled away and stepped outside the room because he was fully flustered. We moved to the night of the prince's send-off banquet, and Carnelia was exhausted, having socialized the whole time with noble women who slyly insulted her throughout the night. Everyone knew if Caesar died, she'd probably be kicked out of the palace, so they were probably thinking she didn't need to be treated well. She was suddenly approached by the one person she didn't want to meet, Gracie Lancaster, the heroine of the story. Gracie was also giving sly insults and backhanded compliments to Carnelia. The biggest plot twist Carnelia encountered in the novel's world was the real personality of Gracie. Her image of the novel was more angelic. After Gracie left, Carnelia was met by her husband. He asked to dance with her, but she was a little reluctant. Given the last time, he said he'd never dance with her again. He could see her pouting, so this time he offered his hand, apologizing and saying that he was wrong to forget she was such a klutz. Not the apology she was looking for, but close enough. The two danced away, chatting. The prince knew they were all thinking he was going to die, and thus told Carnelia she would be sent to the abbey. She stepped on his shoes because she didn't want to go to the abbey. She wanted him to stay alive and at least come back for her sake. After their dance, he went over to Gracie. The two were supposed to fall in love here at the banquet. There had always been talks of marriage between Caesar and Gracie since they were young, but of course, those talks stopped when the Empress interfered. And as the story goes, he comes back as a war hero, parts ways with his evil wife, and marries the heroine. Seeing them together, Carnelia decided to make her exit, but she wasn't expecting him to follow her and put his jacket over her to stave off the cold night air. She was taken aback. She couldn't believe he was here. According to the story, he should be having a lovely time with Gracie right now. He responded by asking her if she was angry at him for talking to another woman. This greatly confused Carnelia. He was assuring her they only exchanged formalities and even smiling at her, possibly thinking she was the jealous one here. He suddenly held her close, promising he'd win the war and come back for her. That way, she wouldn't have to worry about getting kicked out of the palace. Carnelia worried if he was worried all this time about her, so that's why he didn't talk with Gracie and came looking for her. Carnelia wasn't worried about his fate, since she knew the story, but instinctively hugged him back too. 1 week went by, and she saw him off as he waved his goodbyes to her. Regrouping with his mercenary pals who'd known him as Sean the entire time, Miller bowed, knowing his true identity, which he revealed to everyone else to be Caesar de Romancline, the crown prince, of course. And now, he'd tell them everything. About liking this video and subscribing to my channel, because here at My Shoujo Weekly, I'm covering the best villainous stories on YouTube. You want romance? You want action? You want spicy moments? Well, check out this playlist. I've got plenty to see. I'm definitely the best, so subscribe to me. 1 year had passed since Caesar went off to war, and Carnelia was struggling to write him a letter. She didn't want to sound too cringy and over-doting. She wrote she's been practicing her sewing and wanted to give him embroidered purple cloth, and that she was looking forward to seeing him soon, and that she missed him, but became distressed hearing Noah tell her his brother might die from cringe reading this. For final touches, she sprayed her perfume on the letter, hoping the scent still lingered by the time it reached him in the south. Caesar would later smell Carnelia's scent on the letter. His friends teased him a bit for looking so content, so he slammed his fist on the table and shouted at them to leave. But before they stepped out, the red-haired one mentioned remembering the princess was supposed to be Caesar's enemy. Caesar lied back, sighing, understanding Carnelia's public image couldn't be helped at the moment, but he would be sure to take care of it when he returned. Putting one of the many letters he received from her away safely, he sulked on the loneliness he also felt without her. Meanwhile, the king was receiving word of the prince's consecutive victories against the barbarians. At this rate, they'd be able to defeat them all in just a few years. While he was pleased, Empress Evgenia wasn't so, telling her confidant they needed to find Caesar's weakness as soon as possible. Carnelia was a little nervous, seeing Caesar responded to her letter by sending her a tree that only grew in the south. Supposedly, it resembled her, but she couldn't see it. It was delivered by one of Caesar's faithful subordinates, the third son of a fallen noble family, Rhea von Hilt. She asked him to go on a walk with her, wanting to hear more of her husband's conquest. Though she sent multiple letters, she's yet to receive an adequate response from Caesar. However, she wasn't really going on this walk to hear about her husband, but rather to inform Rhea that Brahms Smear, a mercenary who's known Caesar since childhood, was secretly on the Empress's side. She knew Rhea would have a hard time believing this, given Carnelia was chosen as a pawn of the Empress. But at the very least, she wanted him to relay what she said to Caesar, and for him to judge the truth. The next order of business Carnelia had was to plant the tree at Caesar's place, but she'd soon find his manor was neglected, and the maids had been embezzling his monthly allowance. Noah was not pleased learning of this. He suspended the current administrator of his brother's place, and suggested Carnelia take care of it instead. He couldn't do it himself because he was a busy guy. Carnelia was the least busy person in the royal palace, so she lamented a bit, having to give up her carefree time to inspect Caesar's place, and make sure every bit of it was being maintained. She just wished Caesar would come back quickly. Brahms tried sending a letter via bird, but it was shot down and retrieved by Caesar and Rhea. The letter contained many falsehoods about the prince, including a shoulder injury he didn't have. So, Caesar slew Brahms mercilessly, telling his companions to hang his head as an example. He thought this would be enough to prove to Rhea that Carnelia was on their side, and with Rhea still objecting, telling Caesar to consider the idea that maybe Brahm was merely smear bait, Caesar coldly responded with, "If you insult my wife once more, I won't dismiss it so easily." However, stepping away by himself, Caesar wrestled with the idea of the 5 years he spent with Carnelia, all just being an act from her. 6 months passed with Carnelia managing both her and Caesar's palaces. She had more to do than before, but was still passing time with relatively little to do, and it felt wrong somehow. She began to say her prayers, uttering, "To all the emperor's citizens who are paying taxes, I'm so sorry. Because I am a villainess, I will be thrown out of the palace, and soon a new princess who is talented and clever will arrive." She looked like a weirdo in front of her maid. Too much leisure time made her mind wander. She wished she had a nice female friend to talk to. Observing one of the southern trees she was gifted, she noticed they had grown pink flowers. Now she understood what Caesar meant when he said it resembled her, and it made her giddy. She pouted a bit, thinking the gift was too cute for stiff Caesar to have thought of. Late fall, Carnelia made her appearance at the Empire's hunting competition. She was greeted by Gracie, the protagonist, who slyly mocked her. Everyone knew Caesar had been nothing but victorious, but that still didn't make Carnelia's future any brighter, being one of Evgenia's people. However, Carnelia's goal was getting the consolation money and divorcing him, so actually, that was fine. Noticing Gracie's hunting garb, it was evident that she was participating in the event. Carnelia was quite skilled at equestrian as well, but didn't want to participate because she'd have to kill cute and furry living things. A man came by, trying to flirt with Gracie, but she shut him down. Carnelia was familiar with him. This man had a fiancée and was benefiting off of her family name. The two girls thought he was both a scoundrel and loser. Finally, something they could bond over. But the bonding had to end, since canonically, they were both rivals. This left Carnelia with the feeling that if she wasn't the villainess, and Gracie wasn't the heroine, they could have been good friends. Sitting with other noble ladies, Carnelia ended up being a loser in the game of Jenga. Her punishment was to bring back a flower from the hunting field. She happily frolicked through the forest, since it had been a long time since she had been alone, but stepping on one bug caused her to scream and regret her choices, following it up by tripping on a branch and spraining her ankle. She became distressed, just thinking if Caesar was here, he'd have come looking for her. Luckily, Gracie would appear in his stead. She sighed, picking Carnelia up with the princess carry, and now she was leashing her horse back with Carnelia on it. They would make small talk, where Carnelia mentioned everyone said that if Gracie had been born a male, she surely would have inherited her family's title. This caused Carnelia to suddenly stop and crash out over the fact that she couldn't possess anything being a woman. Carnelia wondered if she had just opened a can of worms. Gracie thought it was no use, since she had always had to get her father's permission, whether it was hosting a soiree or spending a dime. If she married, the only thing that would change is that she'd need permission from her husband instead of her father. Carnelia could sympathize, knowing this was a feudal society where patriarchy was the norm. It made sense Gracie thought this way, being born a woman with such remarkable abilities. But here, gender and status was far more important. A light bulb suddenly lit in Carnelia's head, realizing this was why Gracie must have married Caesar in the original story. He was generally indifferent and didn't care what others did, as long as they didn't cause trouble. His wife could run a business or give money to the poor, whatever. Carnelia never thought of this before, since the book told the story from Caesar's point of view as the protagonist. So, Caesar always chose out of love, while Gracie must have chose out of necessity. No wonder she seemed to stare at Caesar with such a dry gaze at the ball. Carnelia could understand Gracie's struggles, but it bothered her knowing Caesar was going to marry her because he thought she really loved him. Gracie continued to complain that her father wasn't going to hand over his duke title, even to his son-in-law if she married. Carnelia then told Gracie she should just become a duke herself, giving the idea that current laws could be ripped apart and changed. This advice made Gracie silent on their journey back. Carnelia was hoping she didn't change the story's plot somehow by telling her this. They were met outside the forest by Raymond Lancaster, Gracie's cousin and the assumptive next in line for dukeship, who teased Gracie for coming back fruitless from the hunt. Gracie was lost in thought though, with Carnelia's words telling her to change the laws and become a duke continually ringing in her mind. She knew her cousin would certainly make a great duke, given Raymond was her father's favorite nephew and he possessed excellent abilities with no flaws in his character. But now, she wondered if she could really become a duke instead. Back on the war campaign, Caesar was looking to finish things up. They had slaughtered almost everyone, but the barbarians still had their leader Aeson and a few men. Even recovering from battle, Caesar wouldn't let up, ordering Miller not to stand in his way. He cut down the few remaining, pointing his blade at the neck of Eisen Gioro, the commander of the 13th United Tribes. Eisen laughed so much, having heard a snot-nosed greenhorn was the commander-in-chief, and was surprised Caesar had come to his path of retreat without even an escort. As a dying wish, he told Caesar to offer his head to his father. He commented on Caesar's sharp mouth and thought he would for sure become emperor with his head as the offering. Slicing Eisen, Caesar fell over, slaying the commander of the opposing force. It wouldn't take long to weed out the rest. He was going to come back to Carnelia like he promised. Back at home, Carnelia was bored watching the opera Tristan. It was so tedious having to attend these kinds of events for her. This was her 7th time watching this. Noah wasn't feeling any better. He's seen it so many more times, he's probably memorized it at this point. They had a bit of a scuffle with another noblewoman who was trying to be condescending towards Carnelia. But Gracie would appear to subtly insult a woman, making her leave off steaming. Carnelia really wanted to commend Gracie's quick wit. Her words sounded nice, but she knew exactly what to say to put someone in their place. She even put Carnelia in place, telling her to speak her mind more before taking off. Noah had been wondering about that for a while now. Everyone said the two girls were best friends, even though Carnelia seemed to deny it. They then noticed a fuss amongst the servants, and they brought news of Caesar sending Aeson's head for the battlefield. The emperor was overjoyed by the news and ordered immediate celebration. Carnelia was at a loss though. She wondered how Caesar killed Aeson so quickly, because according to the novel, Caesar left for war at 17 and came back at 22. He was only 20 right now. Or maybe Carnelia wasn't remembering the novel correctly. She had a vague suspicion the timeline had been warped, and this suspicion was confirmed when a letter from Caesar requesting a triumphal celebration arrived exactly 1 year earlier than the original story. Evgenia was deeply angered hearing Caesar's request. She commanded her servant to tell Caesar directly not to squander the empire's coffers for one moment of fame. Caesar would ignore the servant's calls for over 6 hours, using the excuse he was in a meeting, but you could definitely see he's both relaxed and glowing. Caesar refused the empress's request firmly. He wanted to share the honor of victory with all the soldiers, not just the ones who survived, but also the ones who died in combat. He told the servant to tell the empress to consider if opposing an event honoring fallen soldiers would help or hinder her son in the long term. Riding back, the servant couldn't help but be impressed at how much Caesar had grown in these last 4 years. Reporting his words to Evgenia caused her to spill her tea. Carnelia could read the mood had definitely turned unpleasant. She thought about how this triumphal celebration meant a lot for Caesar. Purple was the noble color of the emperor. The only circumstance where someone besides the emperor wore it would be to send a message to the citizens that the emperor saw him as first in line for the throne. As a consequence, the empress seemed on the brink of destruction, uttering that she should have killed him when he was young. Carnelia thought it was crazy to say that out loud, since there were many listening ears here. But now, she was fixated on Evgenia's personal aid. She didn't remember him from the original story, and with him gesturing a shh motion towards her, now she really didn't like him. Carnelia was really busy these days, having to hurry and complete the cloak Caesar would wear at the celebration. She really didn't know what was happening, since Caesar was returning a year early. Was catching a few of the Empress's spies changing the plot? Carnelia also pondered on why the Empress's aid bothered her so much. The maid serving Carnelia named Alice was gushing over Carnelia's sewing, as if Carnelia believed the prince would succeed the entire time, like she was witnessing the love of a century. Carnelia wondered if Caesar would really love the cloak, or just insult her sewing skills. So, she asked Alice to help her. The cloak was eventually finished, but it made Carnelia somewhat sad. Once Caesar entered wearing it, that meant she'd eventually have to leave this place. One of the maids even pointed out how exhausted she seemed as of late, and even Carnelia wondered why she was getting like this, considering her divorce and escape from the palace were so close. However, she started to think it would be nice if she could see him every once in a while, even after she left. Freya and Jack were picking apart the cloak, pointing out it was obviously made quickly by someone unskilled. Jack thought with it arriving from the palace, they were trying to insult Caesar. But no, he pointed out it was definitely made by his wife. There's no way the palace seamstresses could embroider this badly, but even so, he was satisfied. He was certain a lot has changed in the past 4 years back home, and wondered if Carnelia was less childish now. Perhaps he'd get a scolding for not coming back sooner, but he'd still find joy in it. The preparations for the ceremony proceeded without a hitch. Everything went according to plan, except for on the day of the ceremony, Carnelia had a fever. There was only a few hours left, but she could barely get up. She felt wronged in the god-forsaken body of a supporting character. She should have known this would happen the moment she got sick on her first night as a couple. She didn't have a knack for swordsmanship or magic either. She was pretty much talentless and frail. And who would believe she wouldn't attend her own husband's triumphal celebration because she was sick? This all felt so unfair. In the middle of the night, she felt a cool hand on her head, thinking it was Annie. Having no idea there was a manly figure at her bedside. She wasn't able to get out of bed until 4 days later for the first day of the victory banquet. Even getting dressed up, she still felt somewhat awful. She couldn't relax though, getting scolded by her older brother who came for a visit. He told her to stop putting on airs, thinking she could be driven out of the palace at any moment. He brought up how she didn't attend the ceremony and that there were rumors floating around of the emperor trying to have the prince divorce her and marry Gracie instead. He shouted at her to hold on to the prince, since he was now the emperor's favorite. And his idea was for her to get pregnant by Caesar. That way, they wouldn't be able to kick her out. She clapped back at him though, telling her older brother his greed was excessive. She could see he was nervous now, knowing if she divorced, the House of Easter would no longer be the in-laws of royals. They'd become nothing. She accepted her place as the supporting character in Villainess. She didn't want to hold Caesar back from marrying Gracie and letting the original story proceed, but she wondered why she felt tears coming to her eyes. And there stood her husband, right by the door. Her brother was about to smack her, but Caesar wasn't in the mood to hear marriage advice from anyone. He threw the boy off and had him leave. And now seeing him again, Carnelia was gushing over how tall Caesar had grown. She turned back to wipe her tears, and he grabbed her and hugged her from behind, uttering, "I'm back." He grabbed onto her cheeks, expressing his concern towards her disheveled complexion. And now, she realized he was the one touching her forehead when she was asleep. He got flustered, trying to pretend that wasn't him, and man, she thought he was so cute. With the two heading to the victory banquet, the gazes on them were especially overwhelming today. A prince who celebrated a return with his wife who was soon to be divorced. The perfect gossip fodder for hungry eyes and wagging tongues. They would soon be greeted by the mercenaries who were Caesar's closest knights. The gang made tons of banter, especially the red-haired Jax, who didn't think she would make it today, since she didn't attend the triumphal celebration either. However, Miller remembered that time 9 years ago where Caesar flaked on them to go looking for her. They all teased him for looking so cute, and he couldn't take it. The gang had to take Caesar away for a bit, leaving Carnelia alone with the uncomfortable stares of the people. Noah came by to say hello, and they overheard more hushed whispers about the two of them seeming very close, and them hearing he played the role of her partner while her husband was away. This angered Noah, so Carnelia thought they should move somewhere else less conspicuous in order to cool off. She then remembered Caesar told her to wait for him here, but she thought a little break from the pressure here wouldn't be too bad. Little did they know, Caesar would wander back to find her, overhearing the people talk about Carnelia's potential relationship with Noah, and finding the two dancing together, Caesar would fall back and feel despair. Carnelia snapped him out of it. She could see he seemed a bit pouty, so she decided to prod a bit. He wouldn't answer, so she grabbed his hand, telling him they should go to the terrace together. He asked her if she had a particular reason for wanting to come here, and remembered it as the place he held her right before leaving for war. While she remembered it as the place he cried. He didn't remember that part, and she knew that. She was just teasing, thinking if she did any more, he'd start pouting again. The fireworks shot above them in a beautiful display. But being here like this, it really hit Carnelia. The end of her living here was approaching. Him being back still hadn't hit him yet though. Back then, he didn't want to go to war. So much that he wanted to get on his knees in front of the Empress and give up the throne. Carnelia asked why he didn't just do that then. And to this, he just stared at her, then ruffled her hair responding, "Dunno." When he was in the south, he thought over hundreds of times that he needed to survive and return so that... But before Carnelia could hear him finish, the loud booming fireworks cut him off. She couldn't clearly hear what he said, but looking at his expression, it seemed as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. She felt at ease and assured she could leave the palace in peace. Privately, Duke Lancaster, Gracie's father, reported to Emperor Dietrich the current Empire issues with regards to Empress Evgenia. Dietrich put this aside for now, instead discussing a prospect for the Duke's daughter. We moved to the Sun Palace, the Emperor's residence, where Caesar arrived for the first time in his life. Inside sat his father, Dietrich, his mother, Queen Lilia, and Gracie. Caesar was shocked to see a nobleman's daughter here, considering even royals were rarely invited. The emperor started talking about how Caesar and Gracie were once supposed to be marriage partners, and suggested they get married soon. He also suggested his son divorce, calling the daughter of House Easter ill-suited for him, especially with her being backed by Empress Evgenia. Caesar tried to object to this, and then his father mentioned she may have committed adultery while he was away. This was too much for Caesar. He didn't want to talk about this anymore for now. In the hall, Caesar and Gracie had a one-on-one conversation discussing what happened. He was surprised to hear Gracie was also uninterested in marrying him. On top of that, the reason she didn't have a fiancé or husband right now was because of him. Because the moment her father received news of his first battle victory, Duke Lancaster had been planning to have Caesar marry her. She thought this whole thing was amusing, considering she didn't have even an ounce of interest in Caesar. Caesar could now tell Gracie's behavior towards him up until now had all been an act. He wasn't disappointed like she thought he'd be. He liked her more this way. It was more natural. This made Gracie laugh, thinking he and Carnelia were alike. They both tossed out reckless remarks that caught a person off guard. With her taking off, he wasn't done for the day though. He decided to take a visit to Carnelia's palace. Even trying to have a relaxing fish, Carnelia was exhausted. Her mom came shouting at her this morning with the news Caesar was going to the Sun Palace. She told Carnelia to avoid divorce no matter what. She probably shouldn't expect anything less from the family of the Villainess. Her maid Alice was certain the prince would do the right thing, and that he'd never be so despicable as to abandon his loyal wife, who stayed up nights to sew a cloak for him. She thought he should have turned down the invitation to the Sun Palace, since it was obvious word would spread with his visit to the Emperor. And to this, he appeared right behind her, apologizing because there were very few who could turn down the Emperor. Seeing him, the maid's soul left her body. Carnelia suddenly got a tug at her pole, but with her pulling in, Caesar had to grab her and hold her back. She was sad to see her fishing pole sink though, and started getting pouty. She was overall fine though. He assumed she would be more despondent, especially with him bringing up that Gracie was invited to the Sun Palace as well. But she just laughed it off, telling him she wasn't one bit sad, and brought up how pretty Gracie was. He suddenly jolted up, saying, I couldn't tell, but she eventually got him to admit she was pretty. Carnelia was really casual about the whole thing, telling him that he and Gracie would find affection for each other, even if their marriage was arranged. However, Caesar didn't take this well. He was already married, of course. Still though, Carnelia pressed further, telling him that's why they needed to divorce, so he could become emperor with his family, forming an alliance with Duke Lancaster. She thought that was the right thing to do, since that's how the original story went. She told him she didn't want him to suffer anymore, and to have a proper marriage and live peacefully now. This caused him to pull away from her, and with a serious hurt look on his face, he asked her if she really thought that would make him happy. Carnelia couldn't comprehend this hurt look. Since that day, the two hadn't seen each other, and she just couldn't understand his reaction. They quarreled over trivial things in the past, but she had never seen that expression on his face. She decided to reread the novel, which she recorded in a secret notebook so she wouldn't forget, even writing it in the language of her world so she was the only one who could read it. According to the story, Carnelia was beheaded as soon as Caesar returned, but unlike Carnelia in the story, she made tear-jerking effort these past 10 years to win Caesar's friendship. She was quite impressed with herself, forming a friendship between Villainess and protagonist to the point she avoided death. But now, what he was supposed to do was try to form an alliance with House Lancaster in order to drive out the Empress. The fastest way to ally was for him to marry Gracie. She couldn't understand why he wasn't happy, considering she even brought up divorcing first. Now she wondered maybe it had to do with Caesar returning a year early. He was supposed to marry Gracie at 22, and now felt relief, thinking she could stay by his side a little longer. She suddenly got a knock at the door, and it was Gracie here to visit for tea time. Carnelia was expecting Gracie to tell her to let go of Caesar already, but instead, Gracie asked Carnelia if she was aware that he did not want a divorce. Gracie chuckled, seeing based on Carnelia's reactions that she clearly wasn't aware. Caesar had told Gracie this himself after dinner at the Sun Palace. Carnelia tried to rationalize this, but just couldn't now hearing Gracie didn't want to marry him either. Gracie also wanted nothing to do with the royal line. It It was a mess. As soon as Dietrich was crowned, he locked up the former emperor's siblings and the former emperor's queens as well. Gracie did not want to be in such a precarious position. What she wanted was her own power that no one could take from her. She wanted the attention on herself, not her husband or son. She poked at Carnelia, saying they were basically on the same side, ignoring any grievances Carnelia might have with all the bad things that could come with being empress. Carnelia tried raging, saying they were not on the same side. All she wanted was ample alimony and to live comfortably in a small city after divorce. Still, Gracie found Carnelia adorable and paid no mind to any of it. Coming home though, she found her cousin Raymond visiting, who her father was in fact offering dukeship to with her marriage to Caesar. Little did he and her father know though, she had no intention of marrying him, and she wasn't going to surrender the dukeship so easily. Caesar's been in low spirits since the dinner at the Sun Palace. He was so bothered by what Carnelia said, he couldn't focus on any of his paperwork. He was freaking out, wondering why she'd suddenly bring up divorce. He wondered if she'd really been cheating on him with Noah. Jack started talking about how this was actually a good thing, since everyone in the palace thought Caesar's life would be better without her. But Caesar wasn't having this, so he told Jax to get out of his office. Rhea surprisingly vouched for Carnelia. While he didn't completely trust her, from that moment he went to the palace to deliver the trees, he learned she wasn't the type of person who only thought of herself. He convinced Caesar to ascertain the real reason why Carnelia was going along so easily with the idea of divorce, and Caesar was about to bolt out for the suggestion, not expecting Carnelia to meet him here first. She suddenly grabbed him, telling him they should go out somewhere to have fun, and this brought him joy. He believed maybe she didn't want to divorce. She had actually come feeling bad after hearing from Gracie that Caesar didn't want to divorce her. She ran into Jax along the hallway, surprised to learn he was working on a Sunday, and had been working every day since he came to the palace. Her husband was definitely a terrible boss. She wanted workaholic Caesar to take a break for once. She took him out to a restaurant that she rented out, gandered around the city, and shopping at a designer clothing store. She wanted to show him the pleasures of shopping, and had him try everything on so they could find what color suited him. In the changing room, he forgot his shirt, and when she brought it to him, she was shocked to see all the battle scars on his body. With him taking his shirt and quickly closing the curtain, she felt for him. He eventually came out in a white suit, and Carnelia was impressed, saying, "Clothes look good on a good-looking person." He began to blush and went back to the changing room to try the next outfit. Riding to their next destination, she asked Caesar about his time on the battlefield. She wanted to remind him he could live more at ease now, and that he didn't have to be on high alert 24/7. But really, she also knew in time with House Lancaster's help, he'd push out the Empress's influence and become heir to the throne. She wanted him to indulge in hobbies every now and then, and enjoy his life, even if she wasn't around anymore. Arriving back, he apologized for shouting and leaving her the other day. He wasn't asking her to tell him the truth right now. Touching her face, he told her, "I'll be waiting since I trust you the same way you trust me." Maybe it's because the story's constant diverging from the original made her so perturbed, but she almost told him she was from a different world and that she knew everything that was going to happen. After bathing, Caesar's mind rattled with all the things he still had to do. He now owned land in the south he hadn't done anything with, and still needed to distribute the spoils of war. Up until recently, he was on a bloody battlefield. Small errors in judgment cost thousands of lives. A moment's distraction could have killed him, but no matter what, he could not die because he promised to come back to her. When she told him he could live a little more at ease now, he wondered if he really could. It felt like he'd finally been given permission to rest, and he closed his eyes to do just that. On another day, Carnelia received a gift from Caesar, and all the girls wanted to see her open it. She was surprised, since the necklace was on par with her taste. She could tell he definitely didn't pick it out. He was terrible at picking gifts, usually only buying the most expensive thing in the shop, or the biggest diamond, never in between. Lifting the box, she found a little note from him which read, "I just bought it because I saw it." She thought his simple inclinations were the cutest things about him. The girls noticed she was giggling over the letter and wanted to see. However, she'd keep it for her eyes only. Days earlier, Masha Pierre, the errand boy in noble society who knew the tastes of all noble ladies, was helping Caesar out with picking a gift. Caesar was about to do exactly as Carnelia said, almost choosing the most expensive thing in the shop, and pondered why she wouldn't like it. It was a necklace with a large diamond in the center, and a chain so thick it gave a sense of security. Masha pointed out the necklace she'd eventually receive, and suggested she receive it during a tea party she was having. That way, it'd make her look good. This was a great way for Caesar to become a husband who was loved. She thought he was all grown up, knowing how to send gifts she liked now, while he now understood how important it was to make his wife look good. Overlooking a cliff, the two princely brothers met for a chat. Noah pointed out a palace with a red roof, telling Caesar he'd seen a ghost there when he was young. The palace was where the queens of past emperors were exiled. no men were allowed. The ghost Noah had seen there was young, beautiful, and very much alive. Noah had gone there looking for a place to hide in a game of hide-and-seek with Carnelia. The pale, ghostly-looking woman told him she was the youngest daughter of the leader of a western nomadic tribe, and when her tribe was conquered by the Empire, she was sent here for marriage as a tribute. She married at 12 to the former emperor, who was a lascivious man who always surrounded himself with beautiful women. However, always having so many women already, she was forgotten until the day he passed. She had no choice but to live in this palace, and the people didn't even treat her like a living person. Caesar thought to offer help for this woman, but there was no point. She was already dead. She committed self-end several years ago. Noah apologized for bringing this up, but when he thought of that woman, he also thought of his mother. Perhaps the reason his mother was so ruthless was because she didn't want to end up like her. He knew his mother was fighting to survive, but he didn't want to fight Caesar for the throne, nor did he have interest in succession. He didn't know what to do though. Caesar empathized, telling his brother he felt the same way. He wanted to give up everything and run away, and had countless opportunities to do that, but he didn't, because he had someone to protect. He told his younger brother to think of something he wanted to protect as well, and the comfort allowed the two to laugh the tension off. They had no idea Evgenia's servant, Oscar Hindle, was listening in on them though. Reporting back to her, it was clear Noah misunderstood how she truly felt. Even if Noah did become emperor, she'd still end up secluded to a corner of the palace. Someone forgotten. She'd rather die in that case. She then ordered Oscar to become her eyes and ears for her son from now on. On another day, Caesar easily dodged an arrow sent his way. He wasn't worried about himself, but realizing his detractors would try to target his weakness, he commanded Rhea to send a personal guard to Carnelia's place. She was given Ethan Turner, one of Caesar's personal troops. She couldn't believe she was given such a cute kid, but Ethan assured her he was fully grown at 18. She suddenly heard someone shouting her name, and it was her older brother. He had complaints because she wasn't responding to his letters. But Carnelia's new guard wasn't going to let her brother continue to chastise her. The brother suddenly slapped Ethan, and she gasped like her new little puppy was getting harmed. But she had no idea about Ethan's terrible temper. With him pointing his blade at her brother's neck, she completely forgot who he was in the story because of his beautiful face. Ethan was a loyal subordinate and colleague to Caesar who soloed an enemy camp. She got shepherded out, explaining with one wrong move, he'd be killed. She then apologized to Ethan on behalf of her brother and asked him not to draw his blade so easily. She explained because if he killed her brother, he could be stripped of his title and thrown out of the palace. Ethan clenched his blade, thinking when he was ordered to be the princess's guard, he could take care of her if the rumors of her working with the empress to harm Caesar were true. Ever since meeting Caesar, he decided to live for him. He needed to find out which side Carnelia was on. Elsewhere, Oscar received reports on the difficulty in accessing the first prince's palace. A maid brought him the book where she'd recorded the events of the original story, but of course, he couldn't comprehend it since it was in a different language. On another day of Carnelia trying to survive in the palace, Evgenia was telling her to go meet with Julia, the daughter of Count Persian, and also Noah's prospective wife. Carnelia had to work hard not to lose the Empress's favor, and it was clear Evgenia wanted it to look like Carnelia, the first prince's wife, was submitting to the second prince's wife-to-be. Through a string of events, Jax ended up going as Carnelia's personal guard to the Persian estate, because Ethan had heard Caesar was calling for him. Turns out that wasn't the case. So, Ethan decided to get there as fast as he could on horse because he felt something was wrong. Meanwhile, Carnelia couldn't believe Noah was marrying a beautiful girl like this. Their conversation wasn't flowing well, causing Julia to begin crying. She felt bad for having bad conversational skills. Carnelia decided to ease the conversation, letting Julia know most social activity was just for show anyway. She admitted she was bored at most gatherings, only attending because she had to. The two bonded over the fact they both escaped to the terrace at any opportunity they could. They even agreed the best place to hide at a royal banquet was the last terrace on the north wing of the second floor. Bonding with tons of laughter over this, Carnelia felt at ease, knowing this would be the girl Noah was marrying. Heading out, she spotted Noah heading in. Seeing the flowers behind his back, she could see he was such a man now. He was still a baby in her eyes though, and thought it was so adorable. She brought up how Noah said he wanted to share a bed with her when he was a kid, and seeing Jax was getting fierce through a misunderstanding, Oscar decided to make it worse, questioning if Carnelia had really betrayed her husband. At the same time, Ethan was still trying to track down Carnelia. He found two suspicious bandits along the way, and the bandits thought he had such a nice face, he could definitely make a good item for slave auction. The two ended up getting beaten, and holding the copy of the novel Carnelia recorded in, their client had told them to threaten Carnelia and have her tell them the meaning of the mysterious writings. As Ethan was about to find out who employed them, the two bandits were suddenly assassinated before he could even react. At the same time, Caesar was enraged, having heard what Jax told told him about Noah possibly sleeping with his wife. He went outside to cool off with some sword swings and tried to think about things objectively, but still, his heart to trust her was waning, and Oscar was watching him from the sidelines, thinking of the interesting events about to unfold. Ethan arrived back to Carnelia, who stayed up waiting for his return, much to his surprise. She just couldn't sleep since her guard hadn't come back safely. Taking off, she didn't know he was here to give her diary back. As of late, Noah's been doing poorly on his exams. Still thinking about what he wanted to protect, he decided to fish leisurely beside Carnelia, explaining how he quit his air studying lessons quite some time ago, and his mother had thrown a fit then. He explained to her he had no interest in the throne. He just wanted to eat and play while his big brother worked. She laughed, thinking that was just like him, and felt the same. All she wanted was a solid alimony and to eat and play for the rest of her life, since her fate was divorce anyway. Her life plans were to leave the palace quietly with an enormous alimony, buy a large house in a small city, and rent out her rooms, becoming a rich landlord. Noah was surprised to hear she thought she'd be divorcing Caesar eventually. He didn't think his brother would ever allow a divorce, and now the two spotted him watching them behind a tree. Carnelia called out to Caesar, but he just ignored her. She wondered if he was upset that they were playing without him. This had happened before when they were little, when she invited him to a picnic, but he denied her. She then chose to go with Noah, which made him upset. He was just the playing hard to get type, so from that point on, she got used to asking Caesar to go to places multiple times. And while he was so much older now, Caesar was still baby to her. She found it kind of cute. She had no idea though he'd been egged on by Oscar on the idea she was hiding something. Caesar had so much conflict in his heart with anger and was fighting with all his might not to give in to conclusions. Getting ready for a party, Carnelia put on a new dress that luckily went well with the necklace Caesar gave her. Meeting him, she could tell he was upset, but having one look at her was enough to make him blush. She asked him if he was upset because he thought she only went fishing with his brother, but she explained they didn't go together and that she just happened to find him there. She thought that this was like that time he got upset when they were kids, and teased him by saying she was going to play with Noah alone again, causing him to suddenly stop her, telling her she couldn't. He was having so much fun teasing him, and started pinching his cheeks. She promised to go with Caesar next time, just the two of them. Today's party was being hosted by Gracie to celebrate the success of her business. What Carnelia wasn't expecting was to receive genuine compliments from Gracie on her outfit. Gracie wanted to know the name of the designer, and turns out it was from one of the shops Gracie owned. The prince and Gracie got into an argument because she'd apparently been buying and taking over tons of boutiques. Carnelia was surprised to see them fighting, since they were so lovey-dovey in the novel. The couple got to dance for the first time in a while, and Carnelia inadvertently mentioned dancing with Noah at so many balls while he was away, so he dipped her over so sporadically to the point of her almost falling. He told her to be careful with her words when mentioning Noah. There were many people in the royal palace who wanted to bring him down, and they were trying to find any weakness to hurt his reputation. Carnelia now felt guilty. She'd been acting carefree because she knew the future, but felt she should have been careful in front of nobles who were hungry for rumors. She asked Caesar if he ever thought trusting her would be vain, and he responded by pulling her close, telling her that didn't matter. He decided to trust her regardless of whether or not he got anything out of it. This made Carnelia's heart beat. Those words felt like a proposal of sorts, and made her feel like crying a bit, because she wasn't the heroine of this novel. She began to guzzle tons of drinks, getting so bad, Caesar tried to usher her away. He then suddenly picked her up. Now she was quiet, and the maids were gushing watching him carry his princess away. Sending her to bed, she waved at him to come back to her. She quickly held him, telling Caesar he was a good boy before going to bed. Waking up with a hangover, she couldn't remember anything. She started to think about all the trust Caesar continually gave her. When she had been trying to survive in the palace all alone, he always consistently stayed by her side. Looking back, that gave her a lot of strength. Oscar came to return the fishing gear Carnelia lent to Noah, and seeing him up close made him seem familiar to her for some reason. So she grabbed at his face to get a closer look. She gave Oscar a letter to give to Noah. Then, heading back to her room, her maid alerted her she'd been summoned to the Emperor's Sun Palace. It was there Dietrich was rambling over the 3 times Caesar refused a divorce when asked. The first time, Caesar said it was too early. The second time, he said Gracie didn't want to marry him. And the third time, he said he did not want a divorce. Dietrich asked Carnelia why he would say this, and she thought Caesar was refusing because he pitied her predicament. But she couldn't give that answer. The emperor didn't absolutely believe Caesar needed to succeed the throne, but he believed Caesar was capable of leading the empire competently. But since Caesar lacked the backing of nobles, he couldn't give him the right of succession. obsession. In short, he was telling Carnelia to break up with his son. She was in a tough place. If the Emperor wanted, he could easily frame her for a crime and disgrace her, or have her killed without anyone knowing. Her soul was breaking. She needed to meet with Caesar as soon as possible. Luckily, her maid reminded her tonight was their first bedroom sharing night since his return. Carnelia sat in her bed, seriously stressing over everything. She knew she needed to speak seriously with Caesar about their divorce. She casually waved at him as he entered the bedchambers, but he quickly ran to the wine and started drinking immediately. He walked over like a robot, and he was already drunk. She wondered if something happened to him today. She asked if he was okay, and he really started blushing, asking her if she ever got embarrassed. But she had no idea what he was going on about. They've slept in the same bed since they were 12. He suddenly went on top of her, grabbing to unravel her robe. But when she told him she wanted to talk, she didn't mean talk with their bodies. She pushed at his chest to try to get him off, but suddenly stopped to drool over how muscular it was. She gulped a little too loud, now hoping he didn't think of her as a pervert. They were both in a dangerous position right now. After all, Carnelia was a healthy woman who'd been forced into abstinence while having a fit and handsome man behaving imprudently above her. She had to recompose herself because it wasn't the time to be naughty. She sat him down, telling him the 3 reasons they needed to get a divorce. First, it didn't make sense for the Empress to be a wealthless, nameless lady from a poor family. Second, he needed to ally himself with a reliable house, referring to the Lancasters. And third, she thought her being the mother of the empire to be ridiculous, and pitied the citizens who lived in an empire where she was empress. He simply responded, true, but was surprised that was it. He now understood he thought the right to the throne was most important to him. However, pulling his face close, he told her there was a reason he didn't want to divorce her. He pulled his face closer and closer, finally kissing her forehead. She couldn't believe he actually had feelings for her. Her heart was racing as he told her he didn't want a divorce because he liked her. She could now see his behavior the entire time was because of this. He asked her how she felt, and thinking about it, she always considered her feelings irrelevant because this world of a novel already had a decisive end. If he refused the divorce, the Emperor would kill her. If she became useless to Evgenia, she'd be cast aside. She felt this was so unfair. She just had to occupy the body of the villainess, and with tears dripping down her eyes, she told Caesar she couldn't answer him yet. He wiped her tears, telling her she looked just the same as when she cried as a little girl. He was fine with waiting and asked her not to cry anymore. He then quickly placed her neatly in bed and began to walk away. Even though she treated him as a kid, he wanted to make it clear he was a man now. She gasped, learning that every time they shared a bed, he couldn't sleep and it impeded his work the next day. He then grabbed a blanket and plopped right onto the couch. While the two lay sleeping in separate spots, they both thought about Caesar's confession. To the sound of birds chirping in the morning, Carnelia's eyes had bags. She didn't sleep a wink with so many thoughts running through her head. Caesar also didn't sleep a wink, and with him getting up, Carnelia continued pretending to sleep, because looking at him right now would only embarrass her. He suddenly stubbed his toe on the dresser, making her get up to check on him. However, he'd leave as fast as he could while flustered, and she couldn't get over how adorable he was. She was frustrated, reflecting over all the thoughts she had last night, and now considered what if she chose to change the development of this story. 1 week passed, and Caesar's been really wanting to see Carnelia again. They've both been avoiding each other because it felt awkward. He found a letter on his desk from her, addressed to Noah, and was horrified as he read, "I think it would be best for us not to meet for the time being for various reasons. I hope you can avoid coming to my palace for now. Sorry." Caesar was now down in the dumps, getting comfort from his 10-year-old female dog, Harvey. Bad thoughts were coming to mind, like if Carnelia and Noah really did form that kind of relationship while he was at war. Then it made sense why she'd bring up divorce even in the bedroom. He needed to meet with her immediately. Talking with her, he asked if she had another reason for divorcing him and brought up that she had another man. She had no idea what Noah had to do with this, but he pulled out Noah's letter and he heard from Jax that Noah proposed to share a bed with her. She told him that wasn't true and could see he really looked hurt, but then he quickly ran away. Heading back to his office, he told everyone to get out. He sulked, thinking his entire childhood with Carnelia was pure delusion and didn't know what to do anymore. However, Carnelia and Noah would storm past his guards, demanding to talk with Caesar right now. Noah was especially pissed, telling his older brother there was no way he'd like Carnelia because he already had a type. They brought up the sharing bed mention, and Jack stepped in to confirm he heard it in person, also bringing up he heard about some man named Harvey. That's when they realized Jax had completely misheard, since Harvey was Caesar's dog. She then reminded reminded Caesar of the second time they ever shared a bed together. Back when they were kids, Noah asked if he and Harvey could share the bed with them during their monthly bed-sharing night, and Caesar was shocked, now piecing this misunderstanding. Carnelia then explained the letter she wrote for Noah was because she wanted to take extra precautions not to spread more rumors. Noah stared at his older brother deadpan, because the letter didn't even say that much. Now that Caesar could see he had the wrong idea, he was flustered. Noah was chuckling and Carnelia sighed. Caesar jumped to hold Carnelia out of relief, but also to hide his face because he was so embarrassed. He was a little too big to hide these days, though. Miller could see Jax flamed those misunderstandings, and the guards apologized and took blame. With Caesar wanting some private time with his brother and wife, he had the rest of them get out. With them gone, Noah couldn't stop laughing, saying this had to be recorded in all the history books and passed down from generation to generation. Carnelia coddled Caesar a bit, telling him he was wrong this time, and asked him to listen to her from now on. But she couldn't help but to start laughing as well. His embarrassed look was just too good. Later, Carnelia pondered on why her letter didn't get to Noah. She gave it to Oscar, and still couldn't remember him. She decided to look for her notebook again to gain insight, but found it had gone missing. She pondered on this, because she knew in the novel there wasn't anyone keeping an eye on her, but now wondered if someone suspected her of something. She considered that, with the change of the story thus far, there might be a new enemy that wasn't in the novel. She still didn't know if she liked Caesar as a man or as a friend, but she no longer wanted to disregard her heart and blindly follow a path that would take her away from the palace. After getting her hair cut, she tried thinking of other ways to have Caesar claim the throne. At the palace gates, Jax was taking his leave. He had taken a beating from Caesar, who reminded him slandering a royal was worthy of execution. Caesar spared Jax by dismissing him instead, but before he could leave, Carnelia stopped him. She hadn't forgiven him for his mistake yet, and as punishment, he'd be working at her palace, and he graciously accepted. Oscar, who was spying like usual, didn't expect things to end up so peacefully. He had taken much maneuvering to circulate Carnelia's letter into Caesar's documents. He was impressed by Carnelia's ability to resolve things, and observed her to be different than any royal he encountered before. Later, Gracie accepted a private meeting with Caesar, who was looking to make a deal, but she wasn't expecting Carnelia to be the one spearheading this. They gave Gracie an offer she couldn't refuse. If she helped Caesar gain the backing of House Lancaster, they'd find a way for her to legally inherit the dukeship. They were offering to change the laws and allow title succession for women. The two ladies swore to do what they could on their ends. Carnelia brought out blue lilies for everyone to swear upon, because in their empire, these were a symbol for oath ceremonies. They pledged to do everything they could to help each other. The next morning, Carnelia was forcing Caesar against his will to make it look like they were making out with each other in front of Noah and some other nobles. While the ladies gushed over the romantic view, Noah played his part, acting as if this was a frequent occurrence, symbolizing how much Caesar loved his wife. Now the nobles were thinking the rumors about Carnelia's affairs must have been fake. With Evgenia noticing how close the royal couple seemed these days, she wondered if what Oscar tipped her off about was right, that Carnelia was betraying her. The Empress didn't have concrete evidence, so Oscar suggested they poison Caesar and see how Carnelia reacts to it. It was Thanksgiving Day, where royal family members go to the Temple of the Gods and perform a ritual. It was a non-essential event, so royals took turns leading the ritual every year. This year was Carnelia and Caesar's turn. That morning, Evgenia showed Carnelia the poison she was going to have the priest put into Caesar's wine during the ritual. Carnelia wondered what was going on, because everyone knew poisons were ineffective on him, only leaving him sickly in bed for a few days before full recovery. In fact, she knew this method wasn't Evgenia's style either, and picked up that the Empress was testing which side she was on. Carnelia was conflicted, because if she told Caesar and he didn't drink his wine, she'd definitely be regarded as betraying the Empress. And if she let him drink, the poison was the strongest in their world. Even if he wouldn't die, he would be susceptible to attacks. Thinking about how much trust Caesar had in her, Carnelia straight up told him not to drink it because Evgenia poisoned it, and he agreed. However, he drank it regardless and fell over. She held him in her arms, tearfully asking why he drank it. But of course, he knew if he didn't, the Empress would suspect her. Even with him coughing up blood, they didn't have time to rest. Evgenia's men were heading their way to kill him. They hid until the evening, knowing Caesar's guard would tear the mountains apart to find them. She knew he was immune to death from poison, but could see him suffering in agony still. She decided to get up to drink water, but he stopped her, begging Carnelia to stay by his side. So she held him close and promised to do just that. She could feel him cold and shaking and cuddled onto his chest, falling asleep hoping to keep him warm. The next morning, the knights found them and took Caesar to his palace to rest. By the end of it, Evgenia was completely convinced Carnelia was on her side, and Carnelia had to smile through it all, despite how angry she was. She afterwards entered where the knights were tending to her husband and shouted at Miller to tell her where the antidote was for this special poison. Knowing this information was exposed in the epilogue of the novel. In the story about Caesar's childhood, long before he married, he snuck out of the palace and was attacked by young Miller, who glared at him with murderous intent. In the brig, Miller admitted he knew of Caesar's identity and attacked him on purpose. It was for revenge, because the royals massacred his clan. Caesar was a little confused, because having learned about them in books, the Kugareth clan had horns on their foreheads and possessed strange eyes. Miller looked more human, however, because he was half. He could never forget the day the royal troops burned his village to the ground. They were persecuted for being different. Their homes were stolen from them, and they were forced to live in hiding. Sympathizing with Miller, Caesar opened the gate and went right in, telling Miller if he wanted revenge, to kill him now. However, Miller would definitely be executed for regicide shortly after. Caesar didn't believe that method would solve anything though, and instead asked Miller to be his ally, because he'd one day become emperor and change this land so that anyone could live here in peace, regardless of who they are. Miller over time came to realize Caesar's heroic qualities, becoming Caesar's first peer and most faithful subordinate. Carnelia reasoned she knew he was a Kugareth because of the way he covered his eye, even though in reality it's because she read the novel. His clan cultivated the antidote for the specific poison that Caesar consumed, but they would likely not give it to him because with him becoming a knight, that was the equivalent of turning his back on them. His closest friend even called him a traitor. That didn't matter to Carnelia though. She told him to take her to his village. She couldn't stand to see Caesar suffering like this. Miller was convinced by her earnest face, and they got ready to depart. They went on a tumultuous journey through a rough path, and 2 days later, she returned with the antidote. Turns out, everyone in the village was excited to see Miller again. Carnelia knew in the epilogue. They actually all understood he chose to serve Caesar for his people. Miller was actually the one who put up a wall because he was of mixed blood. Even the friend who called him a traitor apologized for what he said back then and handed him the antidote. Carnelia was exhausted and relieved to see Caesar was all better now. She shouted at him to stop being reckless and told him she was really mad this time. He agreed, but told her not to struggle on her own either. Thinking together was better than thinking alone, and he was always on her side. The side where they'd make a happy ending together. Outside, Ethan was relaxing while Jax was on cleaning duty. Jax had grown quite fond of Carnelia, mentioning she was the one who told Caesar about the spies and knew a lot about the antidote. Hearing this, Ethan wondered how that could be. He went to check up on Carnelia, who was still exhausted. He brought out her missing notebook and explained to her everything that led up to him obtaining it. She then decided to show him her secret library, where she'd been gathering information about the royal palace for the past 10 years and planning countermeasures for the events that would occur. She made the excuse that everything was written in code, just in case this place was discovered. And now, she knew that if someone had stolen her journal, that someone suspected her. She wondered if the person who stole Noah's letter and stole her notebook were one and the same. She asked Ethan if she could count on his help, but before he could promise, she fell over. She collapsed from exhaustion and fatigue. Caesar observed Carnelia's monthly schedule and found it was filled with social gatherings, and she'd also been staying at her library until late at night. He ordered Annie to cancel all of Carnelia's plans until she recovered, and Jax brought up a good idea for a special kind of party they could throw to relieve Carnelia's stress. A week later, she was blindfolded and led to a palace where everyone was dressed up like it was Halloween. Caesar came out as a dashing vampire, and she couldn't help but laugh because everyone looked so funny to her. Teasing him was so fun. Jax suggested this because he heard that in a neighboring nation, when the harvest season ends, they dress like ghosts and celebrate with a festival. They partied throughout the night, and Carnelia was so thankful, she gave Caesar a kiss on the cheek. Meanwhile, Gracie was interested in talking to Rhea, identifying him as the son of Count Ronhild. The kiss made Caesar shriek and scoot away fast. He covered his face and called her mean, and of course, Carnelia ate this up. She was thinking about giving him a kiss every time he did something nice from now on. Returning back to the other two, Gracie admitted she was shocked to learn Rhea had become a knight. She thought he was wasting his talents. Rhea answered he had no desire for status though, while Gracie in contrast was ambitious enough to be chasing it after the Lancaster dukeship. She knew Rhea had more than enough ability to take over his family name, and had been curious on why he hadn't for a long time. Later, Caesar told his father he would ally with the Lancasters without having to divorce, by passing a bill regarding a woman's right to succession. The talk was a success, and Dietrich promised not to mention divorce ever again, as long as the bill passed. The emperor knew most would oppose it, but believed his son getting the bill to pass would be a sufficient enough test for him. This was tough, as they would need at least half of the Elder Council's support in order to pass, and most of them were on Evgenia's side. That's when Gracie suggested suggested using another house. The nation's parliament was made up of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Each region was represented, and the number of allocated votes was determined by the region's population. The Lords could have 5 votes at most, while the Commons were limited to 3. One unique point being the officials in the House of Commons were elected, and not passed down like in the House of Lords. Candidates canvassed their votes through speeches, spending money, and distributing food to a large number of people to gain popularity. Originally, the House of Commons was created so that commoners could also have a voice in politics, but in reality, the members of House of Commons became pawns of nobles who provided funds. Luckily, Gracie was young and rich. All they needed to do was get the House of Commons to elect people on their side before the next parliament meeting. Gracie had made quite a bit of money through her businesses, anticipating something like this. Caesar would meanwhile spend his time campaigning to earn votes from noble houses not aligned with Evgenia. They were still short though, so Carnelia suggested getting Rhea's family to vote for their bill, since their territory was large and they possessed as many as 5 votes. However, Caesar was hesitant to get Rhea involved, considering his brother Kyle was head of their house and the 2 siblings were estranged. Count von Hilt had 3 sons. The youngest, Rhea, would always copy the oldest, Kyle, who was good at everything. But as time passed, Rhea became better than Kyle at everything. Only one person could inherit the countship, and Kyle grew more and more anxious. But his little brother's affection for him never changed. Then, one incident happened where Rhea nearly fell off their roof going after a cat, and Kyle caught him, only to basically Mufasa him like it was the Lion King. Young but shrewd, Rhea understood why his brother let go of his hand. Rhea blamed himself, and the affectionate brothers were never the same after. 7 years went by, and their father heard that any noble house who supplied a soldier to the southern front would be granted land by the royal family. This was the time for the Von Hilts to revitalize their name. The father already intended to have Kyle inherit the house, and his second son was far too delicate, so that only left Rhea as his choice. Kyle didn't even see him off on the day he was sent to war. The Von Hilt family was granted land, allowing them to establish a foothold that elevated their status. And after colluding with Evgenia's family, the Von Hilts came to command the largest domain in their possession. Carnelia told them to leave convincing Count Von Hilt to her. Caesar was concerned for Rhea. However, Carnelia would remind him she was also sold to the royal family for the sake of her house. Hearing this, Caesar immediately thought about how this had impacted Carnelia's life and held on to her, apologizing. The couple had a heartwarming moment where she patted his head, reminding him she wasn't lonely now, knowing she had him who would always take her side. But they forgot Gracie was in the room, so they couldn't get too romantic. In order to pass the bill regarding a woman's right to succession at the imminent parliament meeting, Caesar, Grace, and Carnelia were spending their days busy at work. Only 2 weeks were left, and they'd been so busy, Caesar was Carnelia deficient. He spotted her in the halls and hugged her from behind. Once his charge was complete, he ran off to continue his duties. The day of the parliament meeting came, and the 2 Von Hilt brothers never expected to be called to meet together with Carnelia, who pulled out a document she'd spent all this time searching for. This was part of the novel's story that only Carnelia knew about. The day Kyle let go of his brother on the roof, he was racked with guilt. When the adults in the house agreed to send Rhea to the southern front for battle, Kyle wrote a letter to request he go in his brother's place to seek forgiveness. However, aware of the letter, the adults of House Von Hilt locked Kyle in his room until the day of Rhea's departure, and Rhea left like they had planned. Seeing Rhea returned living well and carefree in the prince's palace, Kyle thought perhaps living with his little brother's hatred was how he could right the wrong he had done to his brother. Kyle admitted he was too late, realizing Rhea was more precious to him than the countship. He had always regretted not listening to how Rhea felt. Rhea then told Kyle he never once resented him. He only kept his distance because he hated that his existence might have been a burden to him. They admitted to both being idiots, and now their misunderstandings were resolved. In return for Carnelia fixing their family feud, Kyle showed up to the parliament meeting last minute, casting all of his family votes on Caesar's bill. Coming back, Caesar woke Carnelia up from her nap, giving her the great news that they won. She then jumped to hug him, causing her to end up on top of him, giving him a light kiss accidentally before passing out on top of him. Putting her back in bed, he was also exhausted because of how hard he'd been working, and passed out beside her. She would wake up in the middle of the night, surprised to see him sleeping right beside her. Staring at him, she touched his lips, thinking about how he could have become emperor so easily, if only he divorced her. But remembered that he liked her, she blushed and turned away. With this, the threats from the emperor to divorce Caesar have disappeared. But of course, Evgenia wouldn't quietly watch Caesar become crown prince. Behind her stood her mighty family house Parium, and someone who suspected Carnelia as well. Morning came, and with Caesar opening his eyes to Carnelia, he quickly ran to a wall and started gasping. He remembered putting her there, but not her wearing night clothes, and wondered why his shirt was unbuttoned. What actually happened was she changed when she woke up, and seeing how uncomfortable he looked, she opened his shirt. He was so frazzled, he escaped from Carnelia's room, and when Jax tried to ask about it, Caesar whacked him in the head and ran off. Serving their lady tea, the maids were glamorizing what had happened last night, especially noting how red Caesar's face was. But Carnelia assured them nothing happened, and Caesar was far too innocent for something like that. The maids started to chatter about all the wonderful things all the handsome guys in the palace did. Hearing this, Carnelia wanted to find out who the most popular man in the palace was, and decided they'd put a vote to it. Carnelia was thinking about who she'd vote for. The safe option would be Caesar, of course, but she felt bad thinking Jax wouldn't get even a single vote. Caesar would later overhear the maids talking about the popularity results coming out when they revealed it. Ethan got first place, then Noah, and Caesar placed at the very bottom with 0 votes. The person right above him was Jax, who received Carnelia's 1 vote. Sneaking up on Carnelia to see this, Caesar ran away. She asked the maids why no one voted for him, and they reasoned he loved her so much, there's no way they could. They expected Carnelia would have at least voted for him. Caesar crashed on his couch, thinking about how unpopular he was. He never spoke more than 5 sentences to a woman besides Carnelia at a party. He believed he probably looked mean and standoffish. No wonder he wasn't popular. It didn't matter how other people saw him, but if even Carnelia didn't find him charming, he felt like he needed to do something. Carnelia arrived at his room, and he immediately pretended he'd been sleeping the whole time. He was scared to hear her admit he actually wasn't charming. This was the first time she'd seen him asleep in a bright room. She thought about how Caesar's looks were totally her type. His eyes looked cold, but were beautiful, and he had a strong nose. When uttering how handsome he was, he stopped pretending to sleep and grabbed at her, asking her to affirm if she really thought that. She was shocked that he had no idea. She told him to ignore the popularity poll, since it was just for fun, and told him in her eyes, he was the most handsome guy in the world. She tried laughing off this statement, since it made her feel so awkward, but he'd soon tell her that her eyes were really pretty, like the color of ambrosia. She was charmed at first, but didn't know what that was, asking if it were a flower or jewel. However, hearing it was some poisonous toad from the south, she'd scream his hair was fluffy like the fur that grew on a spider's leg. He somehow took this as a compliment, making her wonder if she should slap him. Heading to take Carnelia back to her place, they were greeted by a viscount's daughter who wanted to try inviting Caesar out to tea after his work was finished. Carnelia could now understand why Caesar got angry with her over Noah, but wondered if she had the right to be angry. For royals, it was an unquestioned custom to have several concubines besides one's lawful wife, and also, Carnelia still hadn't given Caesar a clear answer on where they stand. However, Caesar would coldly tell this girl he had no interest in spending what little free time he had with anyone besides his wife. This caused the girl to feel embarrassed, so she fled while apologizing. The prince had no idea this woman was hitting on him, and even with Carnelia scolding him for coming to her place all the time, even though he was busy, he just mumbled with flushed face, saying it wasn't that hard. She saw him as an innocent prince, unaware of his handsomeness, completely clueless to other women's attentions, but that's how she knew his heart for her was real, and one day she'd return his love, no matter what it would take. Later, Gracie would adorn Carnelia with tons of gifts, as a thank you for helping change the laws so she could compete for dukeship with her cousin. That day, during the hunting festival where Carnelia told her it was possible, it changed Gracie's worldview. She hoped Carnelia would continue to help her, and she was more than happy to. But elsewhere, trouble was brewing, with the ruthless slaying of another noble house by the hands of Marquis Gerald Parium, Evgenia's younger brother. Within the empire existed 2 time-honored houses that wielded great influence. House Lancaster to the west, which bore many scholars and intellectuals amassing wealth through trade, and House Parium to the east, a military house that bore many generals and commanders, amassing wealth through manufacturing. The royal family maintained a balance of power through political marriages between the 2 houses, and the 2 houses had considered each other rivals from time immemorial. The present mistress of the royal family was the eldest daughter of House Parium, Evgenia, which is why Emperor Dietrich wanted Caesar to work with House Lancaster to restore balance between the two houses. Gerald had slain Viscount Albert, who learned too much about his house and had the potential to betray them with secret knowledge. He pointed his blade at Oscar next, warning him that he'd kill anyone before they had the chance to betray him. No exceptions. His duty as head of House Parium was to dispose of any threat to their house. On another day of Carnelia sneaking out while trying to avoid the Empress's suspicion, she was exhausted, knowing she was running out of excuses for sneaking outside the palace. She wished someone could pretend to be her and wear a disguise. She could see Ethan trembling in their carriage, and this was because he learned his teacher had returned today. Carnelia knew Ethan was probably referring to Blair, the man who taught Caesar and the knights swordsmanship when they were young. She then remembered Blair could use magic, and if they used his abilities, she might be able to move around without raising the Empress's suspicion. He was able to use voice-transforming magic. His specialty was disguising charms. He looked much younger than his age, probably because of this magic. She wondered if she could convince him to help her if she explained her circumstances. Hearing Blair tell her he had heard she'd taken in 2 of his incompetent students, referring to both Ethan and Jax, Carnelia remembered in the novel that Blair was described as an extremely strict teacher. Blair remembered the time before Caesar was sent off for war, where he warned Caesar to delay his departure and just observe the situation a little longer. But Caesar had told him he wouldn't die, because he promised Carnelia he'd come back alive. Blair had since been curious about the woman who penetrated Caesar's heart. Hearing Blair was going to retire since things on the southern front had become peaceful, Carnelia shouted, saying he couldn't. Caesar tried explaining to his wife that Blair had never once went back on his decisions, but was surprised because he immediately agreed to delay retirement. Watching these two brought Blair joy for some reason, so he decided to stick around a little longer. Days had gone by, with Carnelia spying on Oscar, the man she was most suspicious of intercepting her letter to Noah, but what bothered her most was that she didn't remember seeing him in the novel at all. She thought observing his everyday actions might shed some light, but she only found him constantly busy trying to get Noah on his feet to fulfill his responsibilities. Seeing him run off and finally acting suspicious, she chased after him, but with Ethan getting distracted by a house fire, he couldn't tag behind to keep her safe. She was caught alone in the forest with Oscar, who knew she'd been following him for the past few days. She was scared he'd harm her, causing her to trip into a hunting pit, but Oscar broke her fall. They spent their time both suspecting each other of not really being on the Empress's side, but it went nowhere. They awkwardly waited together in the pit for the knights to come to their rescue, where Oscar would eventually bring up their nation's history. A great purge always followed the crowning of a new emperor without fail. He asked Carnelia if she thought history would repeat itself between the two princes. She smiled, answering things would surely be different between the two, reasoning Noah skipped his lessons because he didn't want to fight his elder brother for the throne, and Caesar was trying to become an emperor so he could protect those he loved, including Noah. She believed no matter who became emperor between the two, history would not repeat itself. Hearing this, Oscar wondered if there really was hope between the two, but he wouldn't have much time to answer with Caesar jumping down, asking what Oscar had done to his wife. He grabbed Oscar by the shirt, but Carnelia calmed the tensions by explaining that Oscar saved her. Caesar unfortunately jumped down without a plan and by himself, so now all 3 of them were stuck in the hole, until Jax and Ethan found them. Carnelia would later tell Caesar all the reasons she suspected Oscar, but she couldn't find anything wrong with him. As far as she could tell, Oscar was just a hard-working servant. Carnelia then schemed to use Ethan, the most popular man in the palace, to try prying information out of one of the servants to find something about Oscar's origins. And as expected, he came back with tons of info given to him by all the ladies. According to the ladies in waiting, a few years ago, in the Empress's palace, Oscar Hindle arrived with Marquis Gerald. It was evident he was a servant to House Parium, but Carnelia felt Oscar had too much skepticism towards the royal family to just be a servant. Before that, Oscar apparently resided in Bringit, a village within the Parium domain. The couple would then decide to investigate the village together. Bringit was supposedly a village where commoners with no peerage resided. Carnelia and Caesar were able to enter while avoiding suspicion, thanks to Blair's charm magic. He played the role of Carnelia while she was gone, and now with plenty of time, he planned to give Ethan and Jax some proper training. The couple spent their entire day asking about Oscar, but no one here seemed to know him. They were, however, tipped off that a man named Ricardo might have info, due to the fact that he had a lot of friends in all kinds of places. Along the way, they were approached by a strangely cloaked man who could tell Carnelia was not of this world, and told her if she continued to impose, it would become dangerous for those around her. However, Caesar would pull her away and tell her to ignore him. Checking in at their inn, the two heard a commotion outside, with a woman holding a knife to a man because he had cheated on her. The man apologized, but admitted since his heart had already left her, nothing was going to change. The woman became desperate, threatening to kill herself, but Ricardo would stop her, telling her a man like that wasn't worth it. Ending the dramatic event, Carnelia thought to check on his hand since he caught the woman's knife, and he was stunned, glimmering, telling Carnelia she was his type. It was love at first sight for him. He wanted to treat her to a meal, and it seemed like he had genuinely fallen in love with her. Not good though. Caesar was menacing in the back and brandished his royal sword in front of Ricardo, telling him to get away from his wife this instant. Ricardo basically fell in love and suffered heartbreak within the span of 10 minutes, learning Carnelia was already married. He was depressed, finding out his ideal type for the first time in his life was already taken, and she was also asking for his time because she needed info. Carnelia introduced herself as May, and her partner as Sean, and asking about Oscar Hindle. Ricardo agreed to tell them what they wanted in return for a favor. They agreed to help, and the boys ended up having a competitive night, where they fell asleep in bed together. Carnelia was charmed, finding Caesar holding the special flowers she'd been wanting to see that only grew out here. Caesar would eventually wake up, finding Ricardo by his side, thinking it was going to be Carnelia like last time. Turns out, Caesar had gotten so drunk last night, he was causing trouble around town looking for the special flowers, and Ricardo ended up taking care of him. Skipping through what Ricardo wanted help with, which was pretending to be bandits so his two friends of different social status who were in love could meet again, he could hear Carnelia express that it was unfair that two people were unable to love simply because of their difference in birth. He felt the same way and asked her if a noble was born into a family that amassed its wealth, power, and privileges through wrongful means, if there was anything he could do to redeem himself. Her answer? That noble should take responsibility rather than try to atone for these wrongs. Ricardo found that really admirable. Meanwhile, Gerald was pressing Noah about playing pacifist in succession for the throne. He knew Noah was skipping his lessons because he was disinclined to fight with his brother, and that he also had not officially declared he'd be giving up the throne since it'd make the Empress's position precarious. He warned Noah that being so passive would make him unable to protect anything in the end, and Noah knew his uncle was right. This peace would shatter sooner or later. At the same time, Ricardo revealed Oscar was brought to the village by Gerald before he became Marquis. Oscar's name used to be Luis, and his current name was likely an alias, which is why most of the villagers didn't recognize his name. A few years after Gerald became Marquis, he brought Luis into House Parium, where his name was presumed as Oscar Hindle. Ricardo didn't know why the couple was curious about Oscar, but suggested if they wanted to learn more, they should investigate the Parium estate, because there was supposedly a secret that's been hidden there for a long time. Another rumor he heard was quite shocking, that Gerald brought Oscar from the royal palace. Carnelia and Caesar didn't know what to make of this, since they'd never seen him growing up. It was only a short time, but Carnelia felt warm finding a good friend like Ricardo. However, they did not know they might be meeting again sooner than they thought. A woman had come to find him, telling him to stop playing around. She gave him his formal jacket, telling him Marquis Parium wanted to see him, and Ricardo was also a direct descendant of House Parium as well. Carnelia and Caesar regrouped with Gracie, who thought it would be best to investigate the Parium estate, but there would be difficulty since it was strictly guarded, on top of the fact that Caesar was considered an enemy they'd want to dispose of. Luckily, both Carnelia and Caesar had received invitations to Gerald's birthday every year, but typically ignored them since all royals got invited. They could investigate the estate under the guise of party attendants. Gracie seemed a bit depressed. With Carnelia prying, Gracie admitted her father might decide the heir of House Lancaster soon. She and Raymond were given an assignment to run a shop catered towards commoners for 1 month. Her father was likely going to decide who became Duke based on this, since both she and Raymond were pretty equal in terms of talent. With there being some time before Gerald's birthday, Carnelia decided to help Gracie out. It was mostly successful, with Carnelia getting her husband, Rhea, and Ethan to help out. The handsome men were able to win over a slew of women. This worked a little too well though, because women were starting to grab at Caesar. Seeing this caused Carnelia to get jealous, so she pulled him out of the shop. She was really angry, She wished Caesar had told the girls to stop touching him, but he knew they were like that with him because they didn't know he was their prince. On top of the fact that Carnelia had told him to just smile and not say anything. But to this, Carnelia told him because they were married, she was the only one allowed to touch him. She wondered why he'd gotten so quiet, and looking back at him, he was red in the face. He suddenly hugged her, understanding she was angry out of jealousy. This was a relief to him, thinking he was the only one who was always anxious when it came to men around his lady. Gracie and Raymond would eventually make their report to Duke Lancaster. Raymond opened a grocery store that profited sales 5x, no hitch whatsoever, while Gracie ran her clothing store that produced income at 3x. But the situation got worse after a certain period of time. The Duke had his daughter elaborate, and she explained there was an intense rain in the village she was located at. Several villagers lost their homes overnight, so she provided clothing to them for free, the clothing she was going to sell. Due to that, she could not maintain the shop's sales average. She knew if she had not provided clothing for the refugees, she could have easily achieved sales up to 10 times the street average. But she couldn't turn a blind eye toward the suffering people of the land, managed by the Lancaster name. Moved by Gracie's decision as a good leader, her father named her the heir of House Lancaster. This is how the Empire saw its first female heir to dukeship. Lately, Carnelia had been plagued by nightmares of the man who she knew was not from this world, who warned her to stop interfering with it. Getting ready to head out for Gerald's birthday, Gracie made a stop to see Carnelia first, pledging fealty to her as her thanks. At the Parium estate, the royal couple arrived in white, along with Gracie and Rhea attending together, and finally, Ethan and Miller in disguise as nobles. Back in the day, on one of Gerald's birthdays, his dear sister Evgenia had to leave him to wed Dietrich. She was then recently adopted by the main house of Parium, so she could marry into the royal family. Gerald was fine, despite his parents being dead and his sister being gone, hoping she was at least happy. But this would not last, because soon after Dietrich married Evgenia, Lilia, his maid, had given birth to his child, and she was thus ushered in as the new queen. Gerald was angered, seeing how sad his sister became, wishing he had more power. A few years later, he'd attempt to assassinate Dietrich, but Oscar would advise against it. He knew it was hard to see, but royal guards were protecting the emperor from every blind spot. Oscar knew this wouldn't work because he'd already tried to assassinate Dietrich and failed every time. Present day, Oscar would find Gerald tossing his tea and yelling at his maid. He told Gerald to calm his temper because it was cumbersome to hire new maids all the time. Despite Gerald's fierce demeanor, he grabbed at Oscar, asking him not to abandon him. Our main party was doing their best to mingle at Gerald's birthday party. With advice from Ricardo, Caesar managed to give Carnelia a perfectly normal compliment that managed to make her heart beat. Much better than that last time he compared her eyes to a frog. This was their first dance, since Caesar confessed his feelings to her. Before, it used to feel like she was dancing with a friend, but now she could feel their movements had so many intimate sequences. He ended up dipping her, and she was ready to receive a kiss. But with Ethan choking on his food, they were able to ease the romantic tension, only leaving Carnelia with her heart exploding. However, while Caesar was heading towards Ethan, Carnelia would be met with a mysteriously masked man whose identity is pretty obvious to us. Ethan was getting irritated, essentially getting hit on by one of the guests. He slammed his fist down, telling the man to scram, but before he could get too fierce, Caesar intervened. While Carnelia danced with this man, she asked that he take off his mask so that he could get more comfortable. However, he'd just hand her a note and disappear. Caesar would return, along with Gerald and Oscar to follow up in greeting them. Caesar and Gerald quickly got to bickering, so Carnelia broke it up by asking about the relationship between Oscar and Gerald. Oscar answered he was simply an employee, while Gerald answered he was a longtime friend. Seeing Gerald was being so playful towards Oscar, now Carnelia could confirm Ricardo's tip was correct. Ending the conversation, Carnelia would count down the timer. An explosion went off, so now they could begin their plan. A few days prior, Carnelia had Jackson Blair sit in position to attack the building from the outside. The banquet had filled with smoke, and everyone began scrambling. Carnelia remembered the note she received from the mysterious man, and it read, "Third floor basement, secret passageway." The way to their destination was heavily guarded, so Caesar knocked them out quickly. He would play nice with simple guards, but if anyone touched even a single strand of Carnelia's hair, he'd probably kill them. They eventually found the secret passage and came across a storeroom that was much larger than any they'd seen thus far at the estate. Caesar was shocked, realizing these were the weapons the enemy soldiers used at the southern front, meaning House Parium has been selling weapons to enemy nations. The two suddenly heard people incoming and they hid. Then entered Oscar, Gerald, and some elderly man the two guys were polite towards. After the elderly man left, Gerald expressed his irritation towards him. The man talked down to Gerald, like they were the one who put him in position to become Marquis, but in reality, he earned his spot by killing the former Marquis of House Parium. This was a major divergence from the novel's plot, because Gerald was not Marquis in the original story. It was supposed to be the man that he killed. Carnelia and Caesar had discovered something quite dangerous and needed to leave before they were caught. Unfortunately, they were caught by some soldiers on their way back. One of them grabbed at Carnelia, causing Caesar to get vicious, but Ricardo appeared, commanding the soldiers to stop while revealing himself. The man giving the soldiers commands told them to listen, since Ricardo was the only true heir of House Parium. Ricardo vouched for Caesar and Carnelia and told his men to pretend they hadn't seen anything, reminding the man of the favor his late father granted him. In Gerald's room, Caesar slugged him. He assumed Ricardo had been deceiving them the whole time. However, he'd explained he lived in the village as a commoner as a form of repentance. The House of Parium had been amassing wealth for generations using wrongful means. He learned this during his education as the next head of the house, but could not bear the idea of inheriting it and escaped to the village. That was all he could do. He wouldn't tell them more, since he couldn't turn his back on the very house whose power and wealth allowed him to live comfortably. His servant then entered to inform him that Gerald and his soldiers were coming their way. He became frantic, escorting the two out immediately. By the end of it, Ricardo was thinking the two no longer thought of him as a friend, but he was completely wrong. Carnelia noticed all he'd done to help them learn the truth, and Caesar wanted him to drop the stiff language next time. The royal couple escaped under the moonlight, discussing everything they discovered. They wondered if Ricardo wanted to secretly change the House of Parium and redeem his family's sins. Caesar saw Ricardo as a kind person. Noah too, everyone except himself. He felt like he had stolen countless lives at the southern front. He would have killed them all again to make a name for himself and succeed the throne to protect those precious to him. He would even become a villain to protect Carnelia. Carnelia then leaned on his shoulder, promising he would never become a villain. Falling asleep on his side, touching his shoulder, he felt temptation in his heart, and thought with these wicked thoughts was the very reason he wasn't kind-hearted. Returning back to the secret room of Caesar's palace, the couple waited for everyone else. Gracie and Rhea came in next, having gotten into a bit of a scuffle during what they discovered. They discovered the annex they investigated was filled with the most despicable thieves. Caesar, of course, explained to them the storeroom they discovered was filled with weapons headed to the Burgo Kingdom, a nation they battled with for years. Ethan and Miller arrived next, and Miller decided to open up about his past before Caesar had rescued him from the fire. As a child soldier, Ethan's job was to spark war. He poisoned a diplomat that started a war with the dukedom, and assassinated a military advisor during the creation of a peace pact. Setting off the sequence of events that became a war was his and his colleagues' mission. The person who ordered these missions was Viscount Nicola, who'd been hiding his whereabouts since the fire, but they found him at the Parium estate. They also found documents about his activities there, and it turns out Nicola had been sending children like Ethan on these missions under orders of House Parium, meaning House Parium had been acting behind the scenes to start wars between empires and drive demand to sell arms to expand their wealth. Not everyone came back peacefully though. Jax was bloodied and injured because of the guards he and Blair had to deal with. This deeply upset Carnelia. She believed the hooded man was right. She discovered so many things not mentioned in the novel, and this resulted in the harm of someone she cared for. Her worry only increased. Despite the disturbance at the party, House Parium showed no reaction, and the ominous silence continued. Until one day, Margrave Stuart's head was found hanging from the ramparts of Gallia, a border region, and this caused an uproar in the royal palace and the Elder Council. Carnelia was surprised the state of affairs had become so dangerous that the Margrave of Gallia had been decapitated. There wasn't supposed to be another war before Caesar became emperor. Things were diverging too much from the novel. She felt uneasy. Expressing her worry to Caesar, he wondered why she was getting this way, since she wasn't worried at all when he had first been dispatched to the southern front. Of course, he had no idea that she was confident about the last war and unconfident about this one, since it wasn't even supposed to happen. One unfortunate event after another. The Elder Council declared that Caesar, as the heir apparent, needed to lead the charge and rescue the citizens of Gallia. He met with his father, who grieved over Stuart. They were friends who fought by each other's side before he ascended the throne. Dietrich seemed sickly, but felt no need to address it. He knew what the council had decided and told Caesar once he returned after stabilizing Gallia, he would officially be named to inherit the throne. Caesar felt terrible, knowing his wife didn't want him to go to war, but he had no choice. After Carnelia found the news out from the Empress, she came crying to Caesar because he hadn't told her, just like last time, because he didn't want to worry her. But she was in tears, bringing up that they were married, and she was so scared of what was going to happen to him. Caesar squeezed her close. The two knew this was likely a trap set by House Parium. Carnelia was especially worried, not knowing what the future would hold this time. We moved to a special day where Carnelia told Caesar and his knights to simply amuse themselves, since tomorrow was his departure ceremony. However, she arrived early to stare at him all day, telling him not to pay attention to her. She reminded him he was the most handsome person in the world to her, and told him that looking at beautiful people was therapeutic. She noticed whenever his ears turned red, he was embarrassed. While he was working, he noticed she stopped staring at him, and asked if she was sick of him now. She broke out in laughter. These moments were what made Caesar so lovable to her. She suddenly gave him a kiss on the cheek, leaving a lipstick stain. She couldn't help it. He was just too cute to her. He then began to pout again while getting to work. Trivial daily moments like these were so precious to Carnelia. She wondered why it took so long for her to realize this. The two later went to the shopping district on a date, where Caesar wanted to buy Carnelia clothes this time. With her trying on outfits, he could tell she was acting strange. She'd been listless since finding out he'd be going to Gallia. By the end of the night, she told Caesar he was such a fool. She was sick and tired of pretending she was on his side. She added she maintained her position as the Empress's spy, so she could change sides whenever she wanted. She laughed, knowing since he was leaving tomorrow, he couldn't do anything about it, and coldly told him that she had never truly been on his side, not even once. Now that the charade was over, she could finally tell him goodbye. However, making it to her chambers, she'd sit down breaking into tears. She had always tried being sincere with him, but if she hadn't done that, he would never forget about her. She came to the conclusion that all these things that weren't in the original novel kept happening because of her, and that for things to go back to normal, she needed to disappear from the palace forever. She was going to slip out while everyone was busy preparing for the ceremony. She found it fascinating that the divorce settlement money she had desperately wanted in the beginning meant nothing to her now. The only thing that mattered was that Caesar became happy, like in the novel. She picked up the necklace he bought for her, squeezing it tightly, thinking of how much she loved him, but she wasn't expecting him to storm into her room to hold her tightly because he knew she had lied to him earlier. He could tell she was worried about the words she heard from the mysterious villager all this time, and that it had been weighing on her. She cried over her fears, thinking she wasn't supposed to be with him. To this, Caesar told her to go where she wanted, and whatever it took, he'd find a way to be by her side. She thought about the times he'd stayed by her side through it all, and then admitted she liked him so much, and the two met lips at this moment. In a few hours, when the morning comes, the ceremony would begin, and Caesar would depart for Gallia. Impatient and restless, after finally confirming how they felt, the two desperately tried to memorize every line and every curve of each other. As he took off his shirt, she told him to start quickly, and that he didn't need to be courteous, because once the sun rises, he'd be gone. He'd respond that the night was long, he might lose his mind, and that if he didn't restrain himself, he might break her. This really made Carnelia hot. She called his name over and over, and started crying because the sun was going to rise soon. He wiped her tears, telling her not to cry, promising he'd return safely this time too, and that he would make her happy. The two kissed to this, wanting to make one another truly happy. They held each other, with Carnelia apologizing for the lies she spoke last night, and him apologizing for hiding the fact that he was leaving. Things were different this time though. House Parium requested that he go to Gallia without delay, but last time they had stalled deployment for him as long as they could. Carnelia, being suspicious of the events, told Caesar to send a secret messenger to Gallia. That way, he could learn some background on what happened to Margrave Stuart. Caesar began his leave for the ceremony, telling Carnelia not to attend since her face was a mess with tears, and that might make Evgenia suspicious. But she told him even if it weren't for her face, she wouldn't be able to attend because she could barely walk, thanks to him. After getting dressed, he gave her one final salute, telling her he'd come back for her. With the formalities of the departure ceremony concluded, Caesar led the soldiers to the peninsula of Gallia. Carnelia would later meet with Gracie, per her request, bringing in Ricardo, who was tied up, but there was miscommunication, since she only meant for Gracie to find him and bring him here, not kidnap him. After Carnelia explained what happened, Ricardo agreed to help since they were friends. Seeing Gracie try to question Ricardo since he was from House Parium, Carnelia suddenly had the thought that with her becoming Duchess of Lancaster and him becoming Marquis of Parium, they'd support Caesar from two of the most powerful houses, and Caesar would become completely secure in his position. With Caesar gone, Carnelia was in charge of the palace once again. She started thinking that once she was empress, she'd have to work 10 times more than this. She stopped, reflecting over how before, all she wanted was to not worry about a thing and live a life of leisure. But now, she felt like she could achieve anything. Was this the power of love? She started to cringe at her desk, but was already missing her husband. A few days after Caesar departed, the palace fell to chaos, with the emperor collapsing. He suddenly fainted during a meeting, and there had been rumors about him being sickly for a while now. Carnelia knew this was the right timing for Dietrich to become ill, which was why there was no triumphal celebration in the original story. With the emperor ill and Caesar absent from the capital, the empress had authority over half of the state affairs. Carnelia would then be met with a surprise visit from Queen Lilia, Caesar's mother. The two actually bonded over the stuffiness of palace life and Caesar's stubbornness. And by the end of it, Lilia admitted she was happy for Carnelia and her son. Carnelia was then summoned to meet with Evgenia. She ordered Carnelia to manipulate the account book and frame Queen Lilia for embezzling funds from the prince's palace. Carnelia was going to by no means comply with Evgenia on this. She decided to take extreme measures, burning the account books instead. Blair agreed to save Carnelia soon, but she felt she needed to be injured a little to make it look more natural. She tried touching the flames, but Oscar barged in, coming to her rescue. She couldn't believe this, that him of all people was here to save her. She decided to just pretend to faint instead. The next morning, Carnelia acted with sniffly tears, asking if her burns were so severe that she wouldn't be able to wear clothing that showed her arms anymore. But no, she was informed her wounds were superficial, not what she wanted to hear at all. The prince's study was burned to ash last night. The story was that the candelabra toppled over by accident, and the carpet caught on fire. Carnelia knew this wouldn't let her escape suspicion from the empress's gaze, and wondered how long she'd be able to last. Caesar, meanwhile, received a report from his secret messenger that the situation in Gallia wasn't severe enough to require royal troop deployment. Outside, he'd find Ricardo tied up by Miller, begging to see him. He told Caesar to turn his troops back to the palace immediately, because this was all a scheme conducted by Gerald and the Empress. Ricardo found out through the help of the servants, who were still faithful to the direct line of their house. He discovered Margrave Stuart was alive and well, bribed by the House of Parium to pretend to be dead. On top of that, Caesar only learned just now his father had collapsed from illness. Knowing the Empress was in charge of things back home, he ordered his troops to return because his wife was in danger. Prior to all this, Stuart expressed his grievances, being relegated to protecting the edge of the empire instead of ruling over a central region. He felt as if Dietrich had cast him aside. Gerald took advantage of this and promised Stuart good status in a neighboring nation, which surpassed what he had now, as long as he cooperated. Carnelia had discovered Margrave Stuart's doings via a letter Ricardo sent her. Stuart appeared in front of the Empress, telling her that Caesar told him to pretend to be dead in order to gather troops to plan a revolt. This easily worked, since the royal palace had such a blood-stained history through treason. All the gates of the capital were then sealed, and all remaining soldiers inside the prince's palace were locked up. The parliament debated over Caesar's actions. The later he returned, the better Evgenia would position herself. She'd surely buy off the royal palace, and parliament members to tip the scales towards Caesar having committed treason. With Carnelia being summoned to see the Empress, she told her maid it was okay if she joined the Empress's side. Then told Ethan to grab Jax and regroup with Caesar. Meeting with Evgenia, she was of course suspicious Carnelia was betraying her. She decided to test her one more time, ordering that Carnelia testify that in the account books, Caesar had been embezzling funds for a coup d'etat. Evgenia wanted to end this. Most of the parliament was not convinced of what Margrave Stuart had said about the first prince's scheme, but if she had Carnelia testify finding Caesar was embezzling, it'd be over. Carnelia had to draw the line. She blatantly told Evgenia she wouldn't follow this command, because Caesar has become someone who meant too much to her. Now Evgenia was taken aback, seeing that Carnelia had fallen in love with the first prince. She threw Carnelia in jail, telling her she'd only be released once she was ready to testify against the prince. Noah tried to challenge his mother for going this far, reminding her he never wanted the throne, but she didn't care, telling him that he'd thank her in the future because history was always written by the victors. Noah could only slam his fist against the wall, knowing he had no power at this moment. Ethan would suddenly come for Carnelia after slaying those who were guarding her. More soldiers were coming their way, and no matter how much she begged him to escape, he was here to do his job. In his youth, Ethan had been groomed by Viscount Nicola, along with many other children to do evil deeds, not knowing that what he had been doing was wrong. As soon as Nicola's schemes had been discovered, he shut all of the children in his estate and started a fire to erase the evidence. When Caesar had rescued him, Ethan didn't care if he died, since he lost his reasons to live, having viewed Nicola like a father figure. Caesar then told Ethan to live for him, and that was enough to convince Ethan to serve him. He was going to protect Carnelia even at the cost of his life, because that was what he swore to Caesar. She listened when he told her to run and not look back, and with her leaving, she ordered him to survive and make it out. Fighting off a horde of soldiers, he felt he had a lot to live for still. Carnelia would unfortunately be hit by an arrow on her attempted escape. The soldiers would face her, telling her she needed to pay for her crime of deceiving the Empress with death. And tearing up, thinking she just wanted to see Caesar one last time, he would slay the two of them and pick her up, apologizing for being late. She couldn't believe it was really him. Jax opened the castle gates to get him in, and his men were getting his soldiers out of the palace. Carnelia felt great relief, passing out in Caesar's arms. He felt remorse for leaving her in danger, and swore to never leave her again. Meanwhile, Gracie had Margrave Stewart tied up, and for lying, she was threatening him with torture. Waking up, Ethan accidentally slugged Jax in the face. He was in pain and surprised he was still alive. Carnelia was next to wake up to Caesar at a villa belonging to the House of Lancaster. He explained Gracie was working to bring evidence to cast off his false incrimination. He had his men retreat, since if he acted rashly using force to get into the palace after being accused of treason, it could aggravate public opinion. Carnelia jumped onto Caesar, seeing he was crying but trying to pretend to be calm in order to put her at ease. She decided to kiss him as a way to show just how much he was missed. He told her he missed her too, and they kissed again. Things were about to get frisky. However, Gracie and Ricardo would walk in on them, not wanting to ruin the moment. The two stepped out. Later, Gracie would explain she convinced Margrave Stewart to testify the truth. Even though things would go in Caesar's favor, Carnelia wasn't happy at all. Slandering a royal equaled punishment by execution. That would be Evgenia's punishment, but the result of her dying would also leave Noah devastated. So she had a favor to ask of Ricardo. He then went to meet with Noah and privately explained he was here in service of Carnelia and Caesar. He gave a letter to Noah, revealing the whole truth of his mother's schemes, and Carnelia expressed her worries, knowing his mother would be executed. To this, Noah asked to be taken to see his brother and sister. Ricardo snuck Noah out with no issue, and immediately, Noah asked to strike a deal with Caesar by officially giving up his right to the throne. The only thing Noah wanted in return was preventing his mother from being punished for her slander. Caesar, however, felt the Empress's punishment was justified, since she tried to have him killed several times, and caused people he cared about to get hurt. But he also felt her greatest punishment would be her sense of guilt for standing in the way of her son's future because of her own greed. He accepted Noah's deal. Evgenia was shocked seeing Caesar and Noah meet her together. Noah officially renounced his right to the throne, and Margrave Stewart told the truth about all that transpired. The parliament was heavily swaying in Caesar's favor. All Evgenia could do was walk away. Caesar would later visit Carnelia resting and give her a kiss on the cheek, but she called him an idiot because he missed her lips. She was pretending to be asleep, being too nervous, hoping everything had worked out. It did, but she couldn't help but still feel uneasy, since no one had seen Oscar since the day of the fire. With Caesar's place burned down, he suddenly sprung onto Carnelia that they should start living together. These words felt so much like a proposal that she almost forgot they'd been married for 10 years now. At the same time, Evgenia was shouting at her son. As she was about to hit him, she wasn't prepared to see him in tears, explaining to her that all he wanted to do was protect her. She was now beginning to understand he gave up the throne for her sake. Carnelia would later meet up with Noah and find out he was looking for a location to move to. He felt he needed to leave, since if he stayed here, there would be opposition from nobles who would say that his renunciation was nothing but deception. He assured Carnelia he was fine and wished she'd stop looking so depressed. She then became surprised Noah was proposing to also take his mother with him. He hadn't brought it up to Evgenia yet though, scared to try to convince her, plus she refused to see him at the moment. Carnelia then expressed her own issues with Caesar after moving into the royal palace together. As of late, it's like he'd been avoiding skinship with her at every turn. He'd always find an excuse not to kiss her because he had a meeting or something. The palace was so big, it even had separate rooms, and he hadn't visited her room even once since they moved in together. She couldn't comprehend why he was acting prude all of a sudden, and wondered if this was punishment for her not recognizing his heart for so long. But what really happened was Caesar one day found a book called 107 Questions About Empire Love Lives. He read a particular chapter that opened up about how long after dating until couples engaged in physical relations. He was shocked to see the answer being an average of 6 to 12 months, and now wondered if he was supposed to wait. It reminded him of something his mother told him a long time ago, to cherish those he loved and approach slowly with care. And yet, as soon as he learned Carnelia liked him, he felt weak for failing to restrain himself. He became resolute to wait at least 6 months before making a move on her. However, she'd sigh, thinking she was foolish for expecting a sweet honeymoon in the palace. Dating was one thing, but finding even a moment to talk to him was hard. Suddenly finding him alone, she caught him, dragging him aside to ask if he missed her at all. He admitted he did, and he was fighting the urge to see her. So, she pulled his face in and told him to stop averting his eyes. He continued to struggle, knowing a single kiss could tempt a weak man like him. He accepted a light peck and bolted off as fast as he could. She was angry because of this, but knew he couldn't keep biting her for long. Their official bed-sharing day of the month was just in a few days. Evgenia's frustration was growing. Every family siding with her house was turning on her since hearing Noah's renunciation of the throne. She wondered if this was really the end. She allowed herself to be adopted into the main house of Parium, under the condition that as Empress, she would give them a son who would become Emperor. She let House Parium use her, believing everything would be in her grasp if her son had just become crowned prince. But now, she began to think that her greed had made her son's life difficult. Gerald told his big sister not to give up though, because they still had Oscar. After Oscar had saved Carnelia, he reported that the fire she started was simply an accident. Gerald didn't buy this, and decided to lock Oscar up. Oscar knew Gerald still had another plan to use, and felt he needed to meet with Carnelia before that happened. Meanwhile, Carnelia was enacting her own scheme to get Caesar to play with her in the bedroom. She let him win an equestrian race, where the winner would get one wish from the loser. However, hearing he only wanted to have lunch with her tomorrow, she decided to chat with him longer to sway his direction. With them together on a blanket, she decided to lean on him, reminding him it was just the two of them here. Her feeling up on him was driving him insane, but she continued to tempt him, asking if he'd given his wish some more thought. However, he was still clueless, so she had no choice but to be shameless. He'd later deliberate on what had happened to Masha Pierre, and finally had some kind of clue on what Carnelia wanted. On an evening, Caesar would climb up the castle walls to reach Carnelia on the balcony, and it was there he placed a wedding ring on her finger. They had rings from when they were 12, but they'd since long outgrown them. She was pleased, and wondered why he got her this all of a sudden. But of course, he still misunderstood. She just wanted to feel his touch. She didn't mind though, since this ring was pretty cute. He gave her a kiss, but then fled after, ignoring her temptation. She decided to let him off the hook for now. Gracie would later meet Carnelia with piles of paperwork. Since the emperor was still ill and bedridden, Caesar's work started to pile up. Gracie was here to instruct Carnelia on how to be a proper empress, and thus, her leisurely palace days were coming to an end. Over at the Sun Palace, Caesar overheard his father's personal physician tell the maids that Dietrich no longer needed medicine. Caesar took this as his father being fully recovered. However, when meeting with him, Dietrich was still not well in the slightest. Something was wrong. Caesar didn't have time to ponder on that for long though. He was now worried because in 2 days, it'd be bed-sharing night with Carnelia again. He wondered if he was going to be able to restrain himself sharing a bed with her. His solution? Exhaust himself as much as he could so he wouldn't be able to do the deed with her. On the special night, he'd show up completely exhausted, making the excuse that work had kept him extra busy lately. With him crashing on the bed, her rage meter was beginning to build. She couldn't take this any longer. She pushed him onto the bed and told him to trust her. She started stripping him of his robe, and as she was about to take off her nightgown, he shouted at her to stop. She wondered what his problem was. So, he finally explained that from the book he read, he needed to wait at least 6 months of dating before having intimate nights. With anger, she explained that book was for people who just started dating. They'd been married for 10 years now. She was enraged with sensual frustration, telling him she was going insane because she'd been wanting to go all the way with him for a while now. So, he pulled her in and turned the tables. Ending up on top of her, he began to get really into it, and was going deranged after restraining himself for so long, plus being in a hallucinatory state from lack of sleep. She thought he looked so hot right now. She was ready to do whatever he wanted tonight. Holding hands and touching all the way through. She dreamt about the day he was leaving for Gallia and begged him not to leave. Caesar could see she was in tears and woke her up, asking if she had a nightmare. She then held him close, asking him not to leave her like last time ever again. Her hugging inadvertently made him hot once more, so he needed her to take responsibility for it again. In the morning, Carnelia decided to feed and care for her husband. Her goal was to get him red and blushing, and she succeeded. That's exactly what she lived for. She loved having such an adorable and good-looking husband. Carnelia thought she was ready, but there were way more things she had to do to become crown princess than expected. On top of paperwork, she also had to do volunteer work and attend social gatherings, where she had to give congratulatory speeches. While doing work, she'd later be met by Oscar, who had come in disguise. He barely managed to escape being confined to the Parium estate. He requested she meet him in front of the secluded palace at midnight. This concerned the prince's succession of the throne. Carnelia explained this to Caesar, and even though he didn't trust Oscar, he agreed to let her go as long as he could come with her. While waiting by the secluded palace, Oscar was found by Gerald. Gerald pleaded with Oscar to come back with him, and that he'd forgive Oscar for his betrayal. But Oscar was done. He didn't want to be a part of this revenge anymore, especially having watched Carnelia and Caesar. He learned they were different from the royals of the past. That made him want to stop obsessing over his hatred of Emperor Dietrich and to lean towards the future instead. The two would bicker over what was right and wrong, leading Gerald to accidentally push Oscar over the cliff and fall with a bloody head. Oscar would later reawaken, but his memories would be a mess. He lost all his memories of the past 10 years, and now Gerald could take advantage of this. A month later, we arrive at Caesar's coronation day. He was nervous, but Carnelia assured him he'd be fine. A month ago, they had waited for Oscar in front of the secluded palace, but they never met, and they never heard any news of him. However, there was no time to investigate his whereabouts, because the very next day, the emperor ordered hasty preparation for the crown prince's coronation. The royal palace became tumultuous with preparation, and Caesar was busy every day. It had been a whole month since the couple spent the night together, and the next time wouldn't be until after the coronation. Caesar and Carnelia graced themselves in their empire garbs before Dietrich, who was presenting the ring that had been passed down from generation to generation as a token of the crown prince. Made of a mystical diamond that didn't burn in fire, only one of its kind existed. Carnelia had only read about it in the book and never expected to see it with her own eyes. However, the coronation would be called to a stop by Marquis Parium. He walked in, telling everyone they were being deceived by a coronation that bore no righteousness, announcing the ring in Dietrich's possession was fake, and that the emperor had never received the token of the crown prince from the former emperor. He then presented the very man who inherited the ring, who we knew as Oscar, but revealed as Louis von Romantklein. Carnelia knew something was off about Oscar every time they met. Up close, he and Dietrich had the same eyes. Roberto, Dietrich's father and former emperor, was a womanizer with endless concubines, and thus he had several sons. However, Roberto loved one woman, the youngest daughter of the chief of the Western nomad tribe, Letitia Clankine. He was excited to find out she was pregnant with a boy, but she was worried, knowing every woman in the palace would be against their child-to-be. Roberto's solution? He was going to make her son crown prince. He always had it in mind to pass down the throne to the child of the woman he truly loved, and so he gave her the ring to give to their son. However, a few months later, the healthy emperor passed away from a mysterious illness. The imperial family without an heir apparent shed blood for the throne. The sole survivor who eliminated all the competitors was Dietrich, and as soon as he sat on the throne, he killed his remaining half-brothers, and the former emperor's queens were all shut away in the secluded palace. Letitia was fearful for her unborn child, so she did everything in her power to conceal his existence. Dietrich and Louise tested their rings, where Louise's was the only one unscathed by fire. Now they all realized the reason the emperor delayed the ceremony was because he didn't have the actual ring. Dietrich objected to this, saying there was no proof Louise was chosen to inherit the throne, but Louise would answer to this with eyewitnesses. He brought in all the ladies-in-waiting that were banished to the secluded palace, along with the former emperor's queens. The question of Louise's birth was solved with the testimony testimonies of the ladies-in-waiting, and the imperial elders fell into quandary, arguing over who they should serve. Caesar's coronation was stopped for now, but Carnelia thought something was off about Luis. She ran to him, and seeing her, fragments of his memories came flooding in, causing him to fall over. Gerald would take him away, leaving Carnelia wondering what had happened to him. Luis grew up in the prison-like, secluded palace, tending to his sickly mother. His mother always told him that if the emperor learned of his existence, he wouldn't let them off so easily. For making his mother like this, Luis wanted revenge against Dietrich. And right when he was starting to get tired and lose heart in the face of the imperial guards, he met Gerald, who had the same goal as him. The two became friends and swore to get stronger together for the sake of revenge. Gerald had free access to the imperial palace as Evgenia's younger brother, so he often came to tell Luis about the outside world. The happiness was only temporary. Luis's mother worsened from lack of treatment. He requested a physician again and again, but not once did a physician ever enter the secluded palace. She died without a diagnosis. Even in the end, after she died, Luis had Gerald get him out of the secluded palace, where with tears in his eyes, he swore to make Dietrich pay. The ring was exactly what he needed. After the shocking incident at the coronation, rumors spread out to society, and the House of Parium, now with new cause and the powers on its side, protested Emperor Dietrich's legitimacy. In this uproar, the imperial courts and the nobles were divided into two, one side for Dietrich, one side for Luis. Caesar had been holed up in his room since the ceremony, refusing to open his door. On that fateful day, he told Carnelia he needed alone time, but with days having passed, she broke in, finally seeing he was definitely not okay. He was depressed, thinking about what all his struggles were for. Ever since he was young, no one in the imperial palace was on his side. Since Evgenia loathed him, he had gone to war, even when he didn't want to, because it would lead him to becoming crown prince, all so he could protect the people he cared for, only for it now to all be in vain. He didn't want to think anymore. He just needed Carnelia. He asked her to run away with him, but thinking about all the times she was down and he was there for her, she felt it was her turn to be there for him. She reminded him that if Luis became emperor, House Parium would become so powerful, no one would be able to stand in their way, and that if he wanted to protect everyone, including her, they needed to do something. Caesar met with his father, with no time to waste. However, Dietrich would answer that perhaps this was the price he was paying for killing his own siblings to succeed the throne. He had no choice but to bet on Caesar, telling him to rise to become the next emperor of this land. Dietrich met with the parliament, deciding to bear responsibility for besmirching the authority and legitimacy of the throne, letting them know he was intending to step down. He would be handing the throne to either Caesar or Luis, whoever was more qualified, not involving himself in the decision at all. He wanted the Elder Council to decide. He suggested Gerald bring Luis to the Sun Palace. That way, the two candidates could be under one roof. And Gerald agreed to it, as long as his house was permitted to bring their soldiers. Caesar, Noah, and Gracie, who just officially been declared Duchess Lancaster, were planning on getting the parliament on their side, while at the same time, Ricardo was mulling over the fact that Luis was the crown prince, and that his own father might not have died from illness. Luis was battling with intense headaches since the day he saw Carnelia at coronation. Every time he thought of her, his heart felt compressed. He asked Gerald how he knew her, and Gerald told Luis he confessed his love to her unrequited, and tempted Luis with the idea that if he became emperor, he could have her. The days went by with there being temporary peace, until Luis showed up to meet with Carnelia directly. Chatting with her, he thought about how Gerald had filled him in about everything that happened before he lost his memory, and told him he couldn't let anyone find out he lost it, or it'd put him at a disadvantage. She had so many questions, but he put them off, telling her he only came to see how she was faring. But with her speaking more, he experienced another headache, and more fragments of memories came flooding back into him. However, he couldn't comprehend them. Caesar then appeared, asking Luis what he was doing here, and Luis decided to take off, since Gerald signaled to him that time was up. Caesar was definitely jealous. He didn't like Carnelia caring about other men, but she assured him there was no need to worry, because he's the one she cared about most. With Luis and Caesar catching eyes, Caesar decided to kiss Carnelia suddenly and aggressively, whispering he'd like to come to her bedroom tonight. Luis clenched his fist over this, but getting pulled away by Gerald, he knew those memories that came back to him weren't false, and wondered what Gerald was hiding from him. That evening, Carnelia was reading an invitation she received from Gracie, who was throwing a party to celebrate her dukeship. The celebration was, of course, just an excuse. The true purpose was to get more parliament on their side with socializing, while at the same time, Caesar was trying to seduce Carnelia to get into bed with him by sensually drinking wine. It pretty much worked, so he tossed her against the chair. She could taste the wine from his lips. And then he switched positions, putting her on top of him. He was seriously driving her insane that she kept giving in to him every night these past few days. Gracie had thrown such an incredible party on such short notice. Rhea was surprised he received an invite, which made her a little sad considering their relationship, but also because she wanted him as her dance partner. Carnelia peered from afar, wondering if Gracie had a thing for Rhea. A girl approached Rhea asking for a dance, and to their surprise, he asked Gracie for permission to dance with the girl. Gracie thought it was fine, especially since that girl belonged to a family they needed to win over. The gang was doing everything they could to win over the children of influential party members. The party had one other goal though. Carnelia was investigating how to get proof that Gerald killed the previous Marquis Parium to obtain the title. The murder was taken care of so quietly that even Ricardo hadn't known the truth. The doctor at the time released an official diagnosis of his father dying of heart disease. Carnelia suspected the doctor Ricardo mentioned, finding out he was Viscount Brown, and he used to be a commoner. Gerald had actually given him viscountship and a large estate as soon as he became Marquis. At the party, the Viscount's son, Glenn, was in attendance, and he was a huge fan of the famous opera singer they employed for entertainment. Meanwhile, Gracie was watching the girl who was hitting on Rhea earlier bump and spill her drink onto him on purpose. The girl ushered him to her guest room, and Gracie was not going to let this go quietly. In the private room, the girl brought up how he knew she spilt her drink on him on purpose, yet followed her anyway. This made her think that he liked her too. She liked him from afar for a long time, and was sad since he didn't even remember who she was. As she was about to go in for a kiss, Gracie interrupted them, pointing out that Rhea seemed to be forcing himself for her sake. This made the girl upset and embarrassed, so she ran out. He felt terrible, thinking he'd let go of someone that was important to Caesar's cause, but Gracie reasoned with him that it'd be worse for him to accept her feelings deceitfully. She wouldn't be surprised if he married someone he didn't care for. Gracie admitted she'd been watching him the whole time, causing her to throw his jacket at him once he pointed that out, leaving him blush red just thinking about her. Through a series of events, Carnelia and Caesar were able to confirm Glenn Brown wasn't just a fan of the famous opera singer Luna Sinclair, but also her stalker. They had heard the rumor over the grapevine, but now saw it in action. Caesar had a minor injury thanks to the series of events, and Carnelia was bandaging him up. He had gotten hurt protecting her, and told her it was better he get hurt rather than her, since seeing her in pain would hurt his heart so much. The two had a romantic moment, and decided to get a little frisky in Gracie's estate. With a little background story from Luna, we learned Glenn was such an extreme stalker, he'd follow her everywhere, even forcing her to move several times. She would even find her belongings and underwear missing. She struggled, even reporting her issue with him to the security department. However, that didn't help, because no matter how popular of a singer she was still a commoner. On top of the fact that Glenn's family was protected by House Parium, the more Carnelia heard about this man, the more she hated him. She thought of the perfect way to punish him so that Luna wouldn't have to endure this anymore. They held a 3-day auction of Luna's most cherished items. The person with the total highest bids in the end would win an opportunity for a personal meal with her. And certainly, Glenn wasn't going to let any man steal that from him. This was all a part of Carnelia's plan to bury him into debt. She had Ethan do last-minute bids to force Glenn to bid even higher each time. Glenn was desperate, as he had spent all his cash and was still barely losing. He decided to get a loan from an advertisement he found on the street. Unbeknownst to him, that Caesar's Knights, Miller and Jax, were playing loan sharks, and forced Glenn into signing a contract without reading it fully. After Glenn came a little ahead on the second day, he came back to borrow even more money. He was about to be in so much debt from the interest, he'd never want to stalk Luna again. To celebrate the success, Carnelia decided to tie Caesar up. She was going to do whatever she wanted to him tonight. We moved to the day of the annual hunting tournament, hosted by the Imperial Palace. There were more nobles here than usual, of course, looking to watch over the two fighting for the throne. They were especially curious about Luis's abilities. Caesar was seriously determined here to not only beat Luis at hunting, but pretty much everything. With Carnelia taking some peaceful time alone in the woods like last time, she was greeted by none other than Luis. He was here to rest as well, admitting he actually hated hunting, but he was also here to learn more about what Carnelia was telling him last time. He revealed he had lost his memories, and that Gerald had told him not to tell anyone, but knew Gerald was clearly hiding something, so he wanted her to help him recover what he'd forgotten. Carnelia's solution to this was to take him to the place he was going to meet them the night he disappeared. They arrived at the spot, and his head racked with the memories of falling off the cliff because of Gerald. Heading back together, they spotted Caesar, and a group huddled over Gerald because he was injured. Caesar had shot him by accident. Aiming at a deer, Gerald charged forward and got hit by the arrow. The Marquis was watching Caesar as he aimed his bow, so he definitely took the shot on purpose. Luis was panicking because even though the doctor told him the wound was serious, Gerald was still aching in pain. That's when the doctor announced the arrow was poison-tipped. Luis grew dark, asking they investigate Caesar's arrow quiver, and found all the arrows were laced with poison. Luis was enraged and told Caesar he'd make him pay once he became emperor. Rhea later arrived with news that Gerald survived. However, the poison had no cure, so they amputated his arm to prevent the poison from spreading. Prior to all of this, Gerald was desperate to find ways to have Luis come out on top. However, Luis was already openly suspicious about Gerald hiding something from him. Surmising Luis's memories were returning, Gerald resulting to using the plan that would cost him his arm. Luis knew about this plan and was in tears, seeing his dear friend go to these lengths to make him emperor. His memories had fully returned, and he had originally planned to vent all his anger towards Gerald. But he didn't want him to keep going to these lengths. The news that Marquis Parium was forced to cut off his arm because of Caesar's poisonous arrow spread among the imperial court and nobles in an instant. The intent of the shot was not important, but they whispered amongst each other that it was fitting for the son of Dietrich, the man who killed his siblings, to become emperor. Carnelia took Caesar to the balcony to hopefully help calm him down a bit. She had him touch her stomach, telling him there was precious life there now. She had called for a physician after her body started feeling strange, and the doctor said she was pregnant. Caesar started tearing up, holding her in his arms because he was so happy. He apologized for looking so pitiful these days and promised to stay strong. Meanwhile, Miller and Jax were chasing after Glenn, who owed them a huge amount of gold that was due immediately on the very last line, and also stated that in case the debtor was unable to pay his debt, his life would be subjected to the creditor. If Glenn refused to pay, he'd have to do hard labor and work until the debt was paid off. Glenn's father, Viscount Brown, couldn't believe his son signed this kind of contract. Glenn was begging for his father's help, and his father couldn't believe his only heir was such a fool. That was when Carnelia made her entrance. She promised to write off the Viscount's son's debt in return for him speaking the truth about the late Marquis Parium's death. The Viscount now realized the trap his son had gotten him into. He thought if he admitted the truth, his family would fall as well. However, Carnelia promised to protect his house, knowing the implications. Back in the day, Ricardo's father, the late Marquis Parium, was not happy that Dietrich had a son with Queen Lilia. He wanted a royal son of Parium blood, and if Evgenia was being sent off to the secluded palace because of that, he was planning on cutting off support to her. A situation like this was the very reason he sent Evgenia, since she was from the collateral bloodline. Gerald had overheard this and decided to kill Ricardo's father, with Luis standing as witness. That's when he decided to become Marquis, which would coincidentally be advantageous for his revenge. He didn't regret that affair at all, since it gave him the power to protect his sister. Even though his body was aching, he couldn't stop now. While that was ongoing, Ricardo was fighting for his life to deliver very important account books. He was outnumbered, but luckily, Caesar would step in to aid him. Carnelia was waiting for Caesar to return. Since tomorrow was the day the next emperor was going to be decided on, Luis decided to visit her and explained that even with his memories having returned, he came to tell her that changed nothing. She could see the sad look on his face. He thanked her for everything and told her goodbye. The next day, the parliament meeting was beginning, and Caesar had still not come back. She was getting worried. The parliament members argued for Caesar, against Caesar, making all the arguments they could for both sides. Gerald capitalized on their fears, telling them if Caesar was willing to eliminate him, any of them could be next on the chopping block. That's when Carnelia pulled out her ace in the hole. She had Viscount Brown, the former physician of House Parium, confess that Gerald murdered the late Marquis and usurped his position, along with Luis having stood witness. The parliament members questioned him on why he hid the truth for so long, and he then admitted receiving payment and land for his false testimony from Gerald. Carnelia backed this up, presenting the will of the former Marquis Parium, the most important part stating that the House of Parium should go to no one else but Ricardo. The head of the council verified the will's authenticity. Some of the council members spoke of the appointment of Gerald as Marquis happened too quickly following the previous's death. and they were even shocked to learn he died from illness, since Ricardo's father was always so healthy. Gerald wasn't going to back down, calling this slander, but that was when Ricardo and Caesar arrived. Ricardo presented accounting books from all the nations they'd been going to war with, exposing that his family had been selling weapons to them for a long time. Gerald kept trying to fight Caesar's words, but Ricardo brought up the basement below the armory that held all the weapons being delivered to enemy nations, and Caesar capitalized on this, telling them the imperial forces must be mobilized and sent to search House Parium immediately. Parliament was on board. They wanted to rehold the succession meeting after investigating the estate. However, Gerald would give another push, telling them if they did this, his house would mobilize all its forces and resist. This would force a war in their home nation. Luis couldn't take it anymore though. He admitted to helping Gerald commit treason and gave up his right to the throne. Gerald still had a backup plan. Even with no support from any members of parliament, he snapped his fingers, calling the man he had prepared to assassinate Caesar in case things went south. Carnelia would protect her husband, but Luis would protect both of them instead. Luis apologized, but he'd planned to sacrifice his life, if necessary, to give Caesar the throne. Gerald ran to his side, blaming himself, but Luis didn't want his friend to suffer anymore for the sake of this revenge. Gerald was Luis's first friend. Closing his eyes to his end, he thanked Gerald for that. As Gerald screamed for his fallen friend, Carnelia refused to let things end like this. Last night, thinking Luis was going to do something risky, Carnelia called on Noah to get in touch with the most talented doctor in the Empire, a man who saved hundreds of soldiers who got injured in battle with no hope of survival. Exactly as Ricardo had testified, the basement of the Parium estate was searched. The weapons and account books to the enemy nations spilled out. All the elders who ordered Gerald to sell these weapons were arrested and executed in accordance with imperial law. Then, following the late Marquis's will, Ricardo inherited the peerage and became Marquis Parium. He wasn't going to run from his family's past any longer. After all the truth was revealed, Parliament reconvened and unanimously voted to put Caesar on the throne as emperor. At his coronation, Caesar vowed not to repeat his family's horrific traditions. He wanted to show his father that the throne could be protected without resorting to force. Evgenia told Noah that he was right. Even with Caesar becoming emperor, he did not banish her to the secluded palace. The greatest punishment is for her to accept the fact that she achieved nothing. She now wished she had listened to Noah and decided she'd leave the imperial palace on her own, going wherever he wanted to relocate. Gerald was imprisoned for life, never being allowed to escape his confinement, and forced to repent till death. He shed tears, still uncertain of Luis's survival, since no one would tell him. Carnelia and Caesar would leave flowers at Luis's mother's grave. Turns out, Luis left the capital. He thought it was better people thought he was dead, since some nobles would still try to use him. Luis sacrificed his life here at the palace to leave the future to Caesar and Carnelia, and in the end, these two couldn't do it alone. They did it with the help of all their friends, walking towards the best possible future they could. On a peaceful morning, the royal couple decided to sleep in, since things had become less busy. Quite a while has passed since Caesar ascended the throne. They stabilized the fractured imperial court and resolved the disputes near the borders. They settled a peace treaty with the Kingdom of Burgo just last week, creating the most peace the nation had ever seen. The couple now had so much free time to enjoy, they could play around and flirt. But before they could get busy in their own way, they were interrupted by their son, first Prince Villainess, wanting to show that his little sister called him a stupid head in his diary. Cecilia drew all over it and just disappeared. They needed to find her, but the maid would tell them the princess was on a walk with her guard. Although she did skip her morning lesson, Villainess wanted his parents to find her right away and punish her for calling him a stupid head. Caesar sighed, telling his son to explain what happened between the two, believing Cecilia wouldn't do this for no reason. So, Villainess explained that Cecilia has been saying she wanted to get married to her guard, which prompted him to tell her to keep dreaming. Cecilia sat a little depressed, telling her guard, Ethan, that she wanted to stay out a bit longer. She admitted to drawing in her big brother's diary and didn't want to go back, knowing he was going to give her a hard time. Caesar told her not to worry, he'd protect her, since he was her knight. After all, hearing he'd do anything she requested, she suddenly told him to marry her. Ethan came back to the royal couple nervously, with their daughter telling them she'd like to get engaged to him. Carnelia was trying to figure out how to let their daughter down gently. Cecilia apparently learned about marriage during her etiquette lessons. Carnelia tried to tell her she was too young, but Cecilia responded she wasn't. and that she could even do a prom dance. Carnelia finally got through to her daughter, letting Cecilia know she could get engaged when she was old enough to take care of herself, because right now, she wasn't even big enough to open the palace doors by herself. But she'd soon get chastised by her brother calling her delusional. The two would continue to bicker, running around their father. As of recent, in an attempt to get closer to his daughter, Caesar started reading 100 Ways to Be a Great Father in a Daughter's Eyes. While the two were bonding over tea time, he tried to ask her various questions, like about her classes and how things were, but she'd only one word respond to him, with yeses and nos. He was sweating, having no idea how to get closer to her. He thought about how back when he was a kid, Carnelia had scolded him to answer her questions with depth. Cecilia's ribbon had suddenly fallen off, so she offered it to her dad to have him tie it. He just couldn't say no to her beautiful stare. He finished, but was sweating over the fact that it didn't look good. And when Carnelia and their son came back from their walk, she was shocked seeing the bad hair tying her husband did to Cecilia. Ian poked fun at her, so she checked the mirror. Ethan then appeared to pick her up for lessons, and she got teary-eyed, looking at her father with scorn before letting Ethan pick her up. Setting his book down later, Caesar wondered what the use of this was. It was also a book that had messed up his relationship with Carnelia that one time. He decided to run to his wife for consultation and ask her to help him practice tying hair. Today was Carnelia's wedding anniversary with Caesar. Having something special prepared for her, he took her outside, where the fireworks exploded beautifully over them. She really enjoyed this. It was just like the day he returned from the battlefield. She now remembered he had said something, and it got cut off during the sounds of the explosions that time. He couldn't believe she didn't hear him, and wished she had told him sooner. What he said was that he definitely would come back alive because he wanted to see her, and that it was because of her that he didn't run away from the battlefield. No wonder she had no idea that he liked her until the day of annexation. He let it go though, because after all, she understood his heart. Ian and Cecile then came outside to see them, since they finished their dinner, and Carnelia told Caesar to try what he'd been practicing. Caesar then got to work, and finishing, he tied his daughter's hair successfully. Carnelia gushed over how cute their daughter looked. After checking herself in the mirror, Cecile ran right up to him and told her father she liked it, wanting him to tie her hair like this every day. He then hugged her, promising his darling daughter he'd do it whenever she wanted. The family then all came in for hugs together, as a happy family that took care of their nation. Alright, I'm satisfied by that ending. I had to cut out quite a bit for the sake of time, but I do feel like a few things were unresolved. Like the mysterious man who knew Carnelia was isekai'd, and there was a little bit about Rhea and Gracie I didn't include in the end, but they didn't officially end up together either. I had a lot of fun working on this project, but it took a lot of time and effort. So please, like and subscribe, send a super thanks donation to support if you can, because it really helps me do more of this. But for now, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.